Okay, so we're opening a meeting of the Newbury Selectboard for Monday, December 20th, 2021. It's currently later than it should be. It's 7:40. It's chilly outside. How's everybody out there? Hello. Let's see. So, opening announcements. This meeting is being broadcast on local cable TV and recorded for rebroadcast on local cable channels and on the internet. The meeting is also accessible by remote participation. In order for somebody who is watching this on cable who wants to come in to the Zoom, the phone connection is area code 646-558-8656. And for somebody either dialing in on the phone or coming in on the internet, the meeting ID is 822-3568-1120 with a passcode of 476827. Okay, so there's been a series of regional vaccination clinics. What's currently going on are booster shots. I guess we're done with the youngsters, their clinics, but there actually was a clinic going on tonight. Actually, it probably is still going on. The final shot for the second shot for the final group of the youngsters. But there also are COVID booster clinics that are going to be going on, and the dates and all the other details are on the town website. As always, there are a multitude of boards, commissions, or committees that have openings, and anybody who's interested can go to the town website. There's a listing on the town website of openings, and it really is an opportunity for people to contribute to their community. It can be fun. It can also be boring, but it can be fun. You meet good, interesting people who also are civic minded. So, anybody who's watching this, please give it a thought. Thanks. So there's the boards, commissions, and committees and town departments need to get their information in for FY21 town reports to the town clerk's office, so that can be included in last year's town report. Which Jim, what is the target for publishing that, or what's the target date to have the info, and when would that be published?
So let me double check my notes. So we want to get it in before the end of the year, ideally.
Yep.
So that we can essentially have everything ready for the FinCom meeting, so everyone can have both the town reports from 2020 and 2021.
Okay.
So, does the housing authority submit a section for the town report?
I believe they have in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
Great, thank you. And anybody can subscribe to town email news announcements at the town website, wnewbury.org/subscribe. Make sure with a series of questions on the Council on Aging. At our last meeting, noted that the our previous director of the Council on Aging has left, took a job in another community after many years of service here. There are a series of questions on the agenda that I'm looking at regarding that. I guess I would refer people to rather than my reading through these questions, the agenda is available online on the town website, on the selectmen part of the town website, and you can read these questions if there are anybody who has questions about the services that are continuing to be offered by the Council on Aging.
And Rick, just, I know you know this, but just so everyone knows, so what we did is, that's an insert that was included in the monthly Council on Aging newsletter that was sent out about a week ago to about 800 households in town. And, you know, we wanted to do an FAQ, just, you know, we knew people would know there was a transition coming up, and we wanted people to have, you know, be comfortable that there's continuing services. And I think that, you know, Teresa and Christine in Jim's office did a really, really nice job on this. It's very clear. There's some good information there. So that's why I included it in the packet, just so that to kind of help get that information out there broadly.
Great, thanks. Yeah, good, thank you. Okay, and there also in the package, there was some information on cyber security, cyber safety. You can take a look at that, but just some tips as to ways to deal with email. If you're, you know, if you get things online, I'm guessing this may have also come out of the Council on Aging publication. Is that true, Angus?
No, this actually came to us from, I believe it came from MMA.
Okay. But it's just a series of you know, of tips, things to avoid, so that you don't end up getting hacked, or somewhere your computer doesn't, your information doesn't somehow end up getting compromised online.
I get these things from this guy called Angus, and I never open them.
Yeah.
That's why I use my alias, Archie. You don't think it's from me, but those emails you're clicking, I'm sending them.
Okay. And letter from, or an email from our town accountant, Stephanie Frontiera, to Mike Squire, and thank you for training. This was Stephanie, this was a training for the CPR, and this was references 911 specifically, but what was the training about?
So it's both the defibrillator units that you see hanging in the corridors there, CPR training, as well as the use of, we do have a certain number of panic buttons installed in the town offices that people can press if in the event of something terrible. And so it's just, I just wanted to bring the board's attention to the fact that, you know, we've got, we're now doing some trainings for staff that with COVID and things kind of fallen by the wayside. And so it's great to have seen, you know, Chief Dwyer do a terrific job running the trainings, but also Stephanie's really taken a leadership role in organizing and coordinating. And so this was, we're actually offering this training 3 times with the expectation that everyone on staff would participate. And it's been very enthusiastically embraced. So it's just, you know, just a positive thing.
I will say all employees at Town Hall have taken the training now, with the exception of 5, which is really good.
And for whatever it's worth, board members can sign up if you're able. I actually signed up for the last one, which is the 9th, I don't remember, the 7th. So we're eligible to participate. So I figured taking a refresher for CPR and learning how to use an AED probably wasn't a bad idea. Hopefully I never have to use either one, but better to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it. Okay, so our first item of regular business is Ashley Adams has requested appointment or applied for appointment to the library board. And I know that some of the library board members are online, and I know Ashley is there. Hi, Ashley, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
Good.
Rick, this is Fred Shananya.
I think you need to convene the joint meeting of your board and our board.
Oh, good point. I'm sorry. That's a good point. So, okay, so we'll now open a joint meeting between the, select board and the Board of Library Trustees.
And for the record, I want to point out that we have 6 trustees on attending the meeting, so there is a quorum.
Great. So could each of the, library trustees, introduce themselves, please?
Sure.
This is Fred Shinanya, I'm chair.
Heather Connor.
Hi, Heather.
Marcia
Hi,
Sellismore.
Rick.
Paula Bragger.
Andy Naraki.
Laura, there she is.
Yeah, your audio isn't working, Laura.
Yeah, I'm Laura Collins. Sorry, I failed to unmute.
Okay. Great, thanks. And Ashley, I think I had you on a soccer team I coached once, didn't I?
You did.
That was a few years ago.
That was a few years ago.
Yeah. Hopefully your soccer skills improved once no longer your coach.
Can't say they improved at all, but I think that was a fun thing.
Well, I was never they weren't going to send me to the World Cup either. So, great, good to see you. So thanks for stepping up for the to apply for the library trustees. Did you have any questions or anything in particular that you wanted to say?
I don't think so. I did share my CV with the trustees, so I think they know my background and interest in libraries and advocating for them.
Great.
I served with Ashley on the library director search committee.
Oh, great.
She was really a great member of the committee. She brings a fresh, younger viewpoint, which is really valuable.
Well, and that's good that you, because I was just gonna say, actually, I'm just really glad to see that, there's somebody, that there are more people who are of a younger generation stepping up to be on boards and committees. That's really important, for sort of continuity of the town. Most of us are getting to be, most of us have gray or white hair, I'll just leave it at that.
I just have a procedural question. So would this be for a term to just the most immediate town election, or when would this be for?
This would be to fill the vacancy, and then that position, I believe it's a 2-year or.
It's a 3-year
Is it-
term, but she was 1 year in, I think.
Yes, so it'd be 2 years left on the term would be up for election. So it'd
Okay.
be 1 seat for 2 years.
Okay.
So it's two years left.
2 years left, yeah, but this
And-
appointment would run through to the election.
Right, and so if, when we appoint somebody to the elected position, they don't have to run for the position at the next election?
Only if they choose to.
Only if they choose, okay, but they can just follow by default and continue as an appointed member for the duration of that term.
Of the term, yeah.
Okay.
So if Ashley chooses to run for the 2 years left on the position, she can.
Yeah.
If she chooses just to serve until the town election, she has that option.
Excuse me, I need to interrupt because I think you're operating under misinformation, not that it matters, but for the record. She's filling the term vacated by Sherry Prune, and that term, at least according to the website, is up in this spring of 2022. So it's basically less than a 1-year term. So I just want to make sure that you understand that. Not that it matters, but the record ought to be correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Jim is speculating that might actually be not, the website might be off, so I don't know.
Okay. Shouldn't have brought it up.
Right. Well, no, it's good.
Board of Trustees.
Well, you can move to fill the remainder of the term vacated by Sherry, and
Yeah,
that
'cause
that will take care of it.
According to this, there's 4 positions up for 2022,
Yeah,
when there's technically only 3.
okay,
This one, it says 1 vacancy, that one ends for the election, and then it's a 2-year term.
okay,
After that will be up for election.
okay. So, well, Fred is suggesting that we do it just for the duration of the term. We probably need to do it for dates, or I think.
Yeah, so it'd be the election day. So that would be May.
I think what Fred suggested makes a lot of sense, because that way, whatever it is, you know.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah,
Then we can straighten it out later.
yeah, okay, great.
May
So,
2nd.
given that, did anybody else have any other questions or comments?
Just to thank the trustees for being here tonight and to alert the board that we considered the application of Ashley at our last meeting, and she got our unanimous endorsement and recommendation to the select board.
Great. Yeah, thanks,
I would
everybody.
also like to add one thing, if I could, is that our meetings are never dull. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry if I suggested that could conceivably be the case. I wasn't talking about you guys, no way. Well, I would move that we appoint Ashley Adams to fill the remaining period of the open position on the library board of trustees. Second, great. All in favor, or any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
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 I think it's unanimous.
900.
Great. Great. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
You aced the test.
So Ashley, my office will be in contact with you about getting sworn into office.
Okay.
A couple of things you need to sign, and then if you could fill out the ethics form that we also send you as well. It's a little test, but if you could do that before you come in, you get sworn in, you'll be all set.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks. Goodbye. So Fred, I'm guessing you're here for the next item as well. So
Yes, yes.
request for endorsement to seek Tree City USA designation.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of background on the Tree City designation?
Sure, and thanks for putting me on the agenda in this spot so that it follows. This is something the tree committee has been working on for a while, but we've finally gathered the materials we need. The Tree City USA program is emerged from the Arbor Day Foundation and is administered through the state. And so its goals are education and awareness of trees. And I believe Newburyport is a tree city, as are a number of other trees, another number of other cities. Trees, I think, are part of this, that they're waved in. In any event, I think the most important thing is that we get recognized as being supportive of our trees and forestry. There are no obligations on us in terms of funding anything, or, I mean, we have to show that we have a certain level of funding, but that's not a problem given everything related to trees, including the removals. And it's a program that, if you will, publicizes us as a town that is concerned about its landscape and trees, and there's not any other particular obligation on us. And I know that Angus knows about this, and he's been very supportive and helpful, as has Wayne. And I don't know if that's all you need, but we get signage that we put up around town, and then a lot like the green sign that the Energy Advisory Board got a couple years ago, the green community sign. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but that's just a real quick rundown.
If we take the designation, do we get like a talisman to keep emerald ash borer out of town?
They are escorted out of town by the Arbor Day Foundation.
Okay.
Every single one of them.
They drive here when they hear that.
Of course, you have to enlarge the police force to stand guard at all the entrances to town, so.
Okay, that's the tree police.
Yeah. Oh, are you chartering us to be the tree police now?
Oh, I didn't know.
I don't think you want to do that. Anyway, I wanted, the purpose of this is to, all levity aside, is to get your endorsement for us to go ahead and file the application, which is due by the end of this month for then years ahead. And the signatory can be Angus on the application. So we don't need to involve the select board any further. But I did want to make sure that you understood what we were doing and that we get your endorsement, if you will, or authorization, however you want to word it, to file the application.
Is there a fee associated with the application?
No.
Make a motion that we support the application to become a member of the city.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Right.
And I certainly appreciate Angus's help too. He's been very helpful.
You've spoon-fed me everything, Fred. You've made it very easy, so thank you.
Oh, well.
But I will say, and Fred alluded to this, but yeah, I've worked in Tree Cities before, including my last job. I think it's a great program.
Great. Thanks,
Okay,
Brad.
well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Good night.
The logo is so big, it takes a lot of people.
Yeah, grow more trees. Okay. All right, so yeah, boy, this next one could be a long conversation. Review potential approval of draft Coffin Street conservation restrictions. And thanks for coming, Vanessa. There's a lot of reading material
There it is. A lot coming through today.
Yeah.
too. I don't have any-
I don't think it's today.
Yeah. Can you summarize that, Vanessa? or-
I think so, or I can attempt to summarize part of it, as much as I can remember. So just as an overview, this CR has not even been reviewed by EEA yet, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So this is not before you to be approved for signatures. This is before you as like a first opportunity to look at it and to keep you in the loop of the discussions, the review that the CONSCOM and now the Open Space Committee are having of the conservation restrictions. So there are two conservation restrictions associated with the Coffin Street Conservation Project. There's a conservation restriction that Greenbelt will be granting to the town on the property that we are going to own. And then there's conservation restriction that Save Our Wetlands LLC is granting to the town and Greenbelt as co-holders. The conservation restriction that Greenbelt is granting to the town is fairly straightforward because all Greenbelt wants to be able to do on that property is manage trails and have wildlife habitat. The primary comment that Patricia Reeser had on that was to allow the town the right to maintain trails, to create and maintain trails on that property in the event Greenbelt does not. So that's something that I'll work through with Patricia and the Conservation Commission. I think that can be handled several different ways. On the conservation restriction that Save Our Wetlands is granting the town and Greenbelt, within the conservation restriction, the CR is actually granting a temporary easement on the adjacent property that will be unrestricted to allow us the opportunity to put a trail in. Do you have a map before you? That's one of the exhibits to the conservation restriction.
The little jar that goes out to. Oh,
Exactly,
okay.
yes. So there's the job that goes out to Coffin Street, or the 10-foot strip.
Jim, are you pulling it up at 68 and 69 of the packet?
Yep. That's not the packet.
And 70.
Yeah, it starts at 68, it looks like.
So that's the survey plan. If you go one below that. Yeah, that'll show it. So,
Can you explain that all, please? Jim? Thanks.
yeah, so the conservation restriction from Saber Wetlands LLC to the town also grants a temporary easement over this hash marked area to allow us to figure out if a trail connection could be made there to the existing trails in the field. We have wetlands that we're contending with in this area and this area. So one option is to go around this way and the other option is to go around this way. The landowners that live here are concerned about a trail being here. They're concerned about it being within view of their house, so their preference would be that it goes here, but I'm not precluding that option. What this easement area does is it allows us to see if a trail can go through here, if a trail can go through here, and obviously that would be us, Greenbelt and the town working in concert with the town, because this has to go through the conscom to figure this out. Then at the time that that trail is created, we'll do a survey, and that trail corridor, and I think 20 feet around it, will become a permanent trail easement, and the rest of the temporary easement will go away. So it just gives us an opportunity to have a trail not on the CR property itself, on the adjacent property, and this is all woodlands, that connects to what these are existing trails. I didn't map the trails on the fee property, but these are existing trails that have been mowed historically, primarily by Kathy Fury, actually at River Run Farm, through the fields, and those would be maintained. And then these are trails that don't yet exist, but that Greenbelt, and coming from the parking at the end of Portland Lane to connect with existing trails, and then Greenbelt would work on bringing this trail up to connect to that piece right there.
So it's possible that you might have to do the northern route though, where you go, it's a little ridge of upland there, isn't there? Is that what you
Yeah,
do, the Terry's property on the, to the right?
The ridge of, it goes up in this area.
Oh, up in there, okay.
This is kind of on a bit of a slope that's wet. It's wet in here. It's even, yeah, a little bit wetter than that. So anyway, it just gives us a little bit more flexibility to make sure we can get a trail through there. So that's what makes the conservation restriction from Saber Wetlands to the town of Greenbelt a little bit unusual, is that it has that additional provision in there for that temporary easement and then ultimately permanent trail easement on the adjacent property. Patricia had a similar comment here. She wanted Greenbelt and the town to have an affirmative right to create, manage, maintain, and use these trails. The CR already has that language in there. She also suggested that the landowners have an affirmative right to manage and maintain the trails rather than Greenbelt and or the town. So that's a point of negotiation and discussion with the landowners.
I did read what Patricia had, but I was a little confused. So essentially she was looking for Greenbelt and the town as well as the landowners to all have.
Yeah, it's unclear to me. So
Yeah.
I think that's the discussion that needs to be had. And what I suggested is that the town authorize a representative of the conscom and maybe also a representative of the open space committee to work with me to kind of work through all of that language to something that's satisfactory enough to submit to the state.
Okay.
And then the third document that I've drafted that Patricia had comments on was a memorandum of agreement regarding stewarding the conservation restrictions. Typically, and we did this with Brown Spring Farm APR, where we co-hold that with the town. The holders of the conservation restriction have an obligation to steward that conservation restriction, to monitor it forever and make sure that those terms of those conservation restriction are enforced. If there is a potential violation, to address that. There are several activities within the CR that require prior approval and or notice. Approval is a little bit more involved, but both give you the opportunity to say, yes, that's okay, or no, that's not okay. The state requires that there be one entity of the co-holders that's designated as a lead on that. So we typically offer to be the lead. We have stewardship staff dedicated to doing this and a whole system at Greenbelt set up for doing the baseline reports, doing the monitoring, all the record keeping that's involved. What the MOU sets out is sort of how that relationship happens, what our communication with the town is in that process of issuing approvals and in the case of a violation. So rather than have that be in the conservation restriction, the MOU allows us to flesh that out in more detail and allows the terms to change over time as each entity adapts and grows. And so Patricia's, I think, comment on that was that she wanted the town to be more involved in issuing approvals and involved in the notice. And so again, that was part of my suggestion that, okay, my suggestion would be that the town appoint, a select number of people to work with me on that language for the MOU. I think that's a little bit more efficient than trying to draft in committee or certainly more efficient than me trying to draft it on my own.
So are these suggestions consistent with prior CRs that Greenbelt has with the town?
I would say some of them are a departure from that.
The departure in that there may be more detailed in terms of assigning both rights and responsibilities. It's what it seemed like to me. Is that right?
I mean, the MOU, we only have one other MOU with the town.
Yeah, okay.
So with regards to co-stewarding conservation restrictions.
Okay.
So the second MOU might have more detail in it in terms of how we work together to monitor and enforce conservation, this conservation restriction in particular. I think the affirmative right to create, manage, and maintain trails is something that's maybe not too different, where the conservation restriction is on private property. It's a little bit different, I think, where the town is holding a conservation restriction on Greenbelt property. So I have to take that back to my coworkers and staff and see how they feel about the town having an affirmative right to create trails on our property. I mean, that property that we're going to own is so wet that we won't be able to do very much of anything without coming to the Conservation Commission anyway. So I think there might be ways to handle that outside of a conservation restriction with other municipalities. We handle that through an MOA that says we will create a trail. We will create the trails on the conservation restriction property. We will create the trails that we can on the fee-owned property, rather than the town having a right to put in trails on our property, any way they want. That makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah, no, I understand. But, I think I understood, Patricia's perspective there, which was, we know Greenbelt now, and obviously we have a great relationship and a great deal of trust in Greenbelt. And probably Greenbelt will always be roughly the same organization that it is now. We don't, the town doesn't absolutely know that. And, so if for some reason Greenbelt changes in a significant way in the future, not that we would expect that to happen, but if it were to happen, I think her thought process is we want to make sure that we're covered for that unlikely eventuality. And that was kind of the way I interpreted, what, the questions that Patricia brought up. Does that sound reasonable?
Possibly, again, I haven't had a chance to discuss it with her one-on-one.
Yeah, okay. Well, never happened. Next week though.
I mean, I
Oh,
don't.
that was a vote of
I
confidence.
think we'd lose a lot of our membership if our mission changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah,
we could lose our charitable status, so there are quite a bit of checks and balances in place to
Right.
make sure we don't turn into a rogue organization. So like I said, I think my preference would be to handle that in a separate MOU.
Yeah.
Rather than with a document that's permanent. So I'm happy to answer, any specific questions you might have on any other comments Patricia had, or I'm also happy to, wait to seek approval from you to send this on to EEA, or you could agree to send it on to EEA after the next draft that's approved by the Conservation Commission, for example.
Yeah, I personally would like to see the next draft before that's my personal take. I mean, I did read everything. I actually had time to read it all today, but there was a lot of content, and obviously there were multiple. I'm reading on the laptop, and there were multiple documents, and it was hard to follow everything clearly, and it would be nice to see it all in the document.
I had one thing that I didn't understand at all, and maybe somebody here knows it. Patricia Richard made a comment about there was a certain part of the document that said that if the land was sold, that the property rights would, if there was any profit or whatever, that the money would be apportioned to the Greenbelt and the town and so forth in certain percentages. But what properties would be sold? That's what I couldn't even figure out what we were talking about there.
Right, so I think you're talking about the extinguishment language, so that's language that's been in every conservation restriction that I've ever worked on in Massachusetts, and it's based on models that are used nationally that also have that language in it. It's in the event something should happen that would extinguish the conservation restriction.
That would what?
Extinguish the conservation restriction.
Good.
That would typically be like a taking by through eminent domain.
I mean, it's never happened to my
Yeah.
knowledge in
Yeah.
the country.
Yeah.
I think it would be precedent setting if it did, but forever's a long time. So the language is, and I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that the language is an effort to address the fact that public funding and charitable funding have gone into the purchase of the conservation restriction. So if the land is ever taken by eminent domain, for example, and that eminent domain authority decides that there needs to be, I don't know, a school, a nuclear power plant, what have you, built on the property, then that's completely in conflict with the conservation restriction. That authority might say, we're extinguishing the conservation restriction by means of the eminent domain taking. And in that case, the town is supposed to get back, well, the entities that put funding in are effectively supposed to get the money back that they put into it, as adjusted for inflation.
Okay.
And as determined in this language says that it's as determined by an appraisal at that time.
I can't recall ever seeing that in any other one.
It's
I
always
must have
been in
missed
there.
it before, but I don't recall it. Okay.
Yeah, there's been some rearranging of paragraphs, and that might be under a new heading, but it's the same language.
Okay.
At some point, we're gonna be so accustomed to having read these that we're gonna know what's coming next.
That would be unusual for a select board, but have at it.
So Concom's been through one review
Yes,
already,
and-
but they haven't seen these additional comments.
They have seen the comments, but we haven't had an opportunity to discuss it. That's happening after this.
Oh, tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So I'm happy to come back to the select board with the draft, a revised draft after I worked on it with the CONSCOM or, a subcommittee that you authorize to work on it with me.
Yeah,
I guess I would recommend that that subcommittee be small. But Judy Meisner has already kind of taken a deep dive and has good familiarity with conservation restrictions. Patricia's obviously taken a deep dive on the conservation restrictions. So if you're comfortable with that, I could work with the two of them to produce another draft of both CRs and the MOU and bring that before you at your next meeting.
Yeah,
Do we have to authorize the committee, or is that just something that?
I don't think we need to authorize the committee. Yeah, but that would be great if you would work with them and then come back to us with whatever the product of that is.
Okay.
Obviously, there's only a couple of weeks and it's the holidays and everybody's got a million things going on. So if it's possible for us to have a few days.
And so is the time frame of this holding up the purchase or no?
Not yet. We have until March to close on the entire acquisition. This is probably the most time consuming portion. I mean, and I expected that. So I think if I can get this to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs to review sometime in January, that would be ideal, because what has to happen is they review it and then they have comments. Usually they're not substantive. And then once I make whatever edits they wanted me to make, if they're substantive, I'll bring them back to you in the conscom. If they're not substantive, I'll probably just tell you about it when I bring it back to you for signatures. But once EEA approves the conservation restriction, then they issue a letter saying, okay, Greenbelt, you can go get signatures on these now. And that's when we get all the signatures. So it'll come back to you at the very end to be signed.
Okay, great.
All right, so I will work with Judy Meisner and Patricia if she wants, or someone else we'll work on another round of edits on both conservation restrictions and the MOU. And we'll bring that back to you in early January with a few days in advance for you to read through the documents.
January 3rd?
Yeah, that's the next meeting. Yeah, I'm just wondering, is that really possible? If it is, it's great. But is it?
Do you meet weekly or every other week?
Every other week.
So 3rd and 17th. Well, 17th is the holiday, so 18th.
18th is probably more feasible.
Okay. And then you're okay getting, then after that,
I think so.
I'm guessing we're gonna all be fine with it, but you can get it over to EA.
I think so.
Yeah.
We're they're short staffed at EA right now. They no longer have a conservation restriction reviewer, so that timing is a bit iffy, but I think it'll be all right.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So the MOA is not submitted to the.
No, that's just an agreement between the town and Greenbelt. It's not recorded or anything.
Right.
Great.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
So, hey, just briefly before you step away, Vanessa, you and I talked about this earlier today, but I want to get it right in terms of the legal review and the timing of that. And, you know, I hadn't sent it over to them previously because I knew there were a lot of eyes on it, and I wanted to make sure it was, it sounds like the next draft would be the one to send it out to KP. Do you agree with that?
I think so, yeah, at a minimum. I mean, you could also wait until after EEA has reviewed it. It's up to the town.
But if we waited until after EA had seen it, and then if KP had an issue, had something that they called out, then that would sort of throw us back into.
But and it might anyway, because I mean, if KP changes something significantly and it's a conservation restriction, then EEA is going to be having.
But based on history, it seems a lot, I mean, we've done so many things.
Yeah, so we'll aim to get that next draft to you, Angus, as soon as possible. And then you can decide if that's the time to send it to KP or wait till after the 18th.
Right.
Makes sense if we're voting to approve it on the 17th or 18th. It'd be good to do all every letter.
Yeah.
Very good. If any questions come up in the meantime.
Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays.
Yeah, me too. Don't work on this too hard. Next topic is a used car license renewals. Here you go.
I make a motion to approve, RTI Enterprises in Court, license. The auto.
I think we probably have to do them one, do we have to do them one at a time?
We'll see why.
Okay,
You shouldn't have to,
all right.
unless somebody didn't want to approve of one, in which case I would say separate that one out.
I'd like to add on to that, Pearson's Automotive, 330 Main Street, and Training Auto LLC on High Training Street. Or to license to begin, January 2022 and, ending on assuming, 31st of 2022.
January 1st of 2020.
Very
With the annual?
A second. Discussion. One question I have is, did Pearson's, change, just sort of for information, did Pearson's change ownership? But I thought I'd seen something that Pearson's was, possibly transferring ownership this year.
Yes, so the plan is that they want to sell.
Yeah,
I believe he's retiring or
Okay.
whatever.
yeah,
And so he wants to sell it to a gentleman who wants to purchase it, and the gentleman wants to make sure he has a license.
right, that's what I thought I recalled. He had checked to see if it was what the
Yeah.
situation was
So-
for transferability.
Not yet,
Okay.
but we expect it in the future.
Okay, yeah, and then the reason why I asked is because I saw that it was still signed by Mr. Pearson. And that for some reason I made the assumption that the transaction had already taken place, but that was wrong. Okay, all right, great. Yeah, so, all in favor? Aye.
Okay, so I'll have those, if you could just sign them before we leave tonight.
So are there any other licenses that will need to be renewed? Maybe the last one.
We did liquor licenses and now, and the used car licenses, I think that's it.
Is that it?
I believe, yeah, I believe so.
Yep.
Technically not under my purview, but
Oh, sorry.
just as my tertiary knowledge of the subject.
There's no cannabis license.
No, we do not.
Next is, review potential approval of, home storage trailers. Brad? How you doing? Good, good. I think you're here for this.
I'm not involved with the easement.
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's
so should take the lead of it.
So yeah, it was all in the packet, and there was clarification that Wendy had asked for last time around regarding location of the overrun. And you think that's cleared up? Does anybody have any questions about that?
No, I think we've gone through the language last time.
Yeah, I think we all read it over.
I think, one thing for the board to be aware of that I know, Brad will bring up, and I think, it was something he and I talked about maybe 2 weeks ago, was, we know from prior discussions that the water superintendent had expressed concern about if any of the constructed portions of the trail were gonna go over where the water line is. And, what you can see is that with the meandering trail and the water line, the concept plan is showing some, intersection between the two. Brad can elaborate on this, but it sounds like it's something that can be, picked up and moved pretty easily with basically like a, just undo a bolt and do that. But I just wanted to bring you guys, make you aware of that. That's not what you're approving tonight. You're being asked to accept the easement. So the actual, trail design, obviously has a ways ahead of it in the design, but talking to Brad, we did want to make sure you guys were aware that is something that, the water department has raised some concern about. So
where the puncheon is installed and is on top of the water line, I think the notes mentioned that I think there are 8-foot sections, and the sections can be essentially lifted intact and moved out of the way if for some reason service had to be done on the water line. Is that right, Brad?
Correct. There's no footings or piers or anything going below grade. Everything's resting above grade. And it is supposed to be assembled using screws. So it's easy to disassemble, stockpile on site, and they can address the water line. I will say that they do have a redundant service as well. They installed 2 lines. They're stubbed on either ends of the resource area. So
You mean the spare line and stuff?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And they could also repair it from the inside as well by relining without having to go back in with heavy machinery. And generally speaking, these types of utility easements are non-exclusive. So they don't have exclusive right to use this area. It can be used for other uses such as a trail.
Yeah, okay.
Plus we also have water lines under roads.
Yeah, okay.
throughout
I mean,
town.
I didn't interpret anybody's objecting to, sort of coincident use of it. It was just a question of what was the situation, if there was hard structures that would be put in, how would that impact, the possibility. Obviously, it sounds like it's extremely remote based on redundant lines and the whole fact that you could repair them from within, as you said, but I think Mike was just covering.
Yeah, I defer to Mike on that.
Yeah.
This is compared to the age of some of the other lakes in town. This is
Right.
So what's the new length of the boardwalk then, or the elevated?
It's on the plan. I mean, the area is a total of 500 and some odd square feet, and it's shown at 40 inches in width. So I can do the math.
Yeah, no, it's broken up. It showed somewhere here in the text. It said that it defined it as 2 different segments. One was 60 something feet, the other one was 80 something feet, if I remember right. And those trying to figure out why.
I thought that was the original.
Yeah, there's a change in direction within the puncheon structure right near the water gates.
Oh, okay.
And originally, I can get into that before.
Oh, yeah, okay. I see that. I didn't see that line there before. Right. Okay.
So does the easement language reflect that though? Where did you see that?
Oh, the length, boy, I have to go back and find it. It's in the text, in one of the emails. Let me see if I can find that.
So will this impact the price
Yeah.
substantially?
I mean, it's either that or more impact to the resource. I could give a fuller presentation to the board if they wish. You and I spoke offline about it. I'm more than happy to talk about that, but.
When you said, will this impact the price?
Well, this changed, the original proposal was a short 40-foot section and then a 75-foot section over the stream.
Okay.
So this is just a different orientation. I think it makes more sense because it's in the already disturbed area. Okay, I was just wondering
Yeah.
about the cost.
We changed the approach. Right now, let me orient myself. You have a peninsula right here in the center.
Sorry, no, that's me.
Yeah, that's what we do. And you see these triangles coming in like this. This is one wetland line, and then it wraps around like this. So it comes sort of create a horseshoe, and then you have some upland up here. We have a stream bank that comes in this way here. We tried to minimize the amount of boardwalk required by going the shortest distance required to cross wetland A and then wetland B. There's another wetland line here. Conservation agent and I walked out there, and it's quite wet on this peninsula, and it's also quite a bit of grade change, and there's quite a bit of vegetation out there. At the same time, there's also quite a bit of vegetation on this bank here adjacent to the stream, and we were quite hesitant about impacting that vegetation. After going back and looking at the plan, it's clear that a lot of the vegetation that was cleared along the bank was cleared during the installation of the water line. So the least impact on the resource is by following the alignment of the water line. So
the way that you're crossing the stream now, you're basically using the puncheon is essentially those what is it, like 8 by 12s or something, whatever the dimensions were of those of the stringers are essentially bridging the stream.
The puncheon structure rests on 8 by 8 or 10 by 10 inch mud sills, and then you have joists on top of that, and then your deck boards go across, and then rails on either side to comply with.
So those joists are what are bridging the stream. There aren't separate bridges anywhere. There's the joists are what are bridging the stream.
Yeah, and then they're elevated so there's water can flow underneath the structure. We also want to keep the path as close as we can within the existing alignment, just because that's current use pattern, and we don't want to come to residents and say we're coming closer to their property or we're not. We are obviously coming very close to this person's property, and the trail does do something like this. We are trying to avoid trees and whatnot, but we curve here to try to achieve a slope less than 5% to be compliant with AB regulations.
Well, I thought you put those curves in just to be aesthetic.
Well, we are going to put. This is the replication area right here. I don't think we're quite 1.5 to 1, but we're close.
Great.
So my only question is in this easement language, in terms of the map, it's just referring to the trail A and B from the definitive subdivision plan. So this new map is not referenced in here. Is that an issue with the easement? Because the trail placement in those two maps is not what's shown here. Right.
I have no idea about the easements. I'm just designing a trail that's crossing these resource areas.
So I wonder if we can just add a sentence with that. I'm just looking at page 1 of the easement, where it references the map in the 3rd paragraph. Or maybe it's not an issue. Angus, do you think it has to have the correct trail location in there?
No, the easement wouldn't normally have that level of detail. It's just creating essentially the right of way for the trail. Which section, Wendy, are you looking at? That
On
reference-
the third paragraph, reference Trail A and Trail B in the subdivision plan.
Okay, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that runs with the entire area of the easement. Not the trail.
Okay. I move that we would, approve the easement. The trail easement as, on fair?
Aye.
Aye. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that, we probably took that. Okay. So the next item is, potential review or potential revisions to the COVID protocols in the town building. You know, the whole COVID situation is obviously a changing situation. And, you know, we had defined a policy a couple of meetings ago. And, since then, you know, things have changed, and not so sure that us, you know, that having a policy where the board needs to adapt to a changing situation through meeting and voting is really an effective way for us to manage the situation. It's just, you know, we need to be able to respond, the town needs to be able to respond more quickly as things change, and you know, both in terms of the realities of COVID and in terms of CDC or Mass Department of Health policies or you know, recommendations. And you know, so I just don't think that we can respond quickly enough and appropriately to that. So the question is, what do we do from there? And, you know, there was proposed a change. Page that's on.
119.
Okay.
Well, 118 is the memo. 119 is the draft.
So would we then, how would we handle that?
Well,
To just, it seems like it's a staff management issue. It's not really something the board needs to do.
exactly. So, you know, we might have a very broad or general policy and leave it up to management, to the town manager, or to staff, you know, to basically roll with the situation, be able to deal with the realities of the situation instead of having hard lines on, you know, dates and durations and things like that.
So if we've already approved the policy, that's my question, I guess.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
well, yeah, we might want to repeal it or or we might want to make it more general, and giving latitude, to staff.
You got the page, Rick?
119.
119.
190.
By the way, I know there was a lot of emails late today, but Angus forwarded was that for Mass Department of Health, Angus? I'm trying to recall, it was CDC, the information on transmissibility and outcomes of COVID infection. And
Yeah, that came from the Commonwealth.
okay, yeah, so the numbers are remarkable in terms of the importance of the vaccination, of getting vaccinated. And so I just hope people who are not currently vaccinated see that, think about it, and decide to de-risk themselves.
So Angus, on page 120, there's a draft that it's page 2 of the revised exposure protocol, but it's not really. I don't see that it's changing anything.
You mean with the addition of the word unvaccinated?
So that's okay. But it doesn't say what to do with. Yeah, it said it has by adding the word unvaccinated, but then the next, it doesn't give any policy in terms of what would happen with a vaccinated person. I thought Paul Sabicki's comments when he sent an email earlier in the day, and I read that and said this is simple, and this is what this is what it should be. There's a lot of weeds here to get lost in on page 2, it seems to me.
Well, should we decide first whether we should, can we just transfer authority for this policy to the town manager and let him resolve it? Is that an appropriate way to handle it? Unless you're looking for feedback on these changes, Angus.
Well, I mean, where we kind of were, over through the pandemic and through the summer was, we did have guidelines, but we didn't have anything kind of in writing like this. And when employees asked, we would give the CDC guidelines. And, we were hearing some concern is that wasn't clear enough, or that was too open to interpretation. So as you know, that was kind of the genesis of this protocol, was to try to write something that was clear. And certainly I want to, the policy that my office puts forward, I want to ensure that it's consistent with the board's policy intent. It's not a personnel policy per se, but it kind of is in effect. And the Town Manager Act, I'm charged with implementing policy as set by the board. So there are plenty of towns where the town manager or the town administrator sets the policy. They set it out on their letterhead, and they say these are the protocols in terms of exposure or quarantine or that kind of thing. I think in our town, it has been good to have this discussed in a public setting like we have. And I think it's been good to have the board kind of on record saying you agree with how it's being done. I think with how it's playing out, And with also some of these changes, both with, some of what we're hearing with CDC, with the test to stay, or this, I think there is, a strong rationale to modify it, because the way it was written, I mean, right in the first paragraph, it basically, part of the rationale was that it was written in such a way as to assume that basically everybody is unvaccinated, which is a very conservative approach. And where in fact a lot of people are vaccinated, the close contact language applying to vaccinated employees, proves to be pretty limiting. So, I think procedurally you have a couple of options. I think, you have a red line draft in front of you. That's a starting point. You could, if you like that, great. If you want to tweak that, that's fine too. But I think if you really do want to go in the direction of more bare bones, I know I can speak for Paul and Stephanie. I don't need to because she's right here on the call, but I know the three of us all feel like if we're meeting CDC guidelines with the additional step of requiring masking and distancing in all of the shared common areas of the building, we feel at a kind of a management level that that's sufficient. And that's very much in line with what other communities are doing, and even goes beyond what some communities are doing in terms of the masking requirement. We're very comfortable with all of that. But we have circulated that, we circulated a draft before it was voted. We circulated it once it was approved. I circulated staff, a couple of days ago to say these changes are going to be considered. We did get some feedback, some comments that are sent around this morning. I think with the modest, in my view anyway, the modest changes in the draft protocol, I think, would be really helpful. Without being totally transformative in terms of what you've done. So in terms of at least moving forward tonight, that might be a good thing to focus on, rather than, the idea of kind of stepping away from it entirely. Because now that you've kind of stepped now that you've adopted policy, it does need a board vote to either modify it or repeal it. So. But the big intent with the proposed changes is to kind of differentiate between vaccinated and unvaccinated employees, and to recognize that vaccinated employees, don't have the same risk level with regard to having had a close contact, particularly if they're demonstrating a negative. I mean, that's the big thing. We're talking about people who are demonstrating that they're not positive.
Angus, we age too. You're not making it any easier for vaccinated people.
So I just want to reach out to the board. I've done a lot of research on the Mass Municipal Human Resource listserv, as well as talking to my colleagues in surrounding communities. Our policy is very, very strict. It doesn't really make sense at this point. The CDC guidelines are constantly changing. I would like the board to try to consider something following the CDC guidelines. So as they change, with the help of the health agent, letting the staff know and the employees know that we're going to go that route. It just makes things a lot easier in this changing environment.
I agree. I just think that you're making it more, page 2 is making it more confusing. It's too, that's all. I'm in favor of what Stephanie is saying.
That was essentially saying that what we should be doing is following the CDC recommendations.
Yes, yeah.
As they change, if they change and as they change.
Yeah.
Plus adding the mask mandate, I think is helpful within the town office building. That's an easy thing that everyone can do, is wear a mask when you're walking in the halls and you can't maintain the distance. I think that's really important. Especially as the cases are going up.
it should be, everyone should bear in mind that if there were to be a employee who didn't, feel safe, we have been very accommodating in terms of remote work, and just about every employee can work, if not at full capacity, at close to full capacity remotely. I hope it wouldn't come to that, but we have been very accommodating on that.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna try a motion to revise, and I'll undoubtedly, this will be muddled, but, I would, move that we, change our protocol to follow the CDC recommendations, continue to require, masking and, safe social distancing, within the town office building for all people in the building, whether employees or visitors. And that we be as accommodating as possible for any employee who is not comfortable with being in the space within this building, given that set of conditions, be as accommodating as possible to allow them to work remotely. So that's pretty rough, but
I'll second your model.
So what does that mean for this protocol? This is in place?
this is in place of this. So I guess I'm interested in feedback from anybody, because there may be plenty of holes and plenty of things like that.
I mean, my only question to what you just said, Rick, is from discussion is within reason, we don't know how long this situation is going on, but I think it would be, someone might have anxieties about the COVID situation 3 years from now. We can't accommodate that.
Okay.
Just, there has to be some clarity or endpoint or something.
Okay, no, good point, Archie. So in this policy, this was proposed, I think, to be effective through June 30, 2022, which is the end of this fiscal year. And so I would,
let's keep it at that.
yeah, so I'd add that to the motion.
Yeah.
To retain that. And of course, we have no idea what will be going on July 1st.
Yeah, no idea.
But, we can revisit it at that point. Sure, please.
So Angus and Stephanie, how will you determine if an employee is vaccinated and which protocol they'll follow? I mean, CDC, just ask them. I mean, how would privacy or do privacy concerns play in there?
We've never asked employees to either state or document that they're vaccinated or not vaccinated. I think if there's a different set of expectations for vaccinated or unvaccinated, I think we, and Stephanie, I want your thoughts, but I would think we would want to know and have that on record who is not vaccinated. What do you think, Stephanie? I know you've had a lot of one-on-one conversations with different staff on this.
Yeah, I guess legally, I'd want to make sure that we can do that. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that if someone had an exposure, then it would be a valid thing to ask. And that's the approach we've been doing currently. But I don't know, as far as going you know, I guess I'd want to just make sure that we can legally do that.
But I mean, under the current CDC guidelines, there are different protocols if you're vaccinated versus unvaccinated, right? So
Correct. Yeah.
if this policy is to follow the CDC protocol, it seems like we need to, you know, establish how we're going to determine that.
And it's, to my knowledge, all employees at town hall are vaccinated with the exception of one that I know of.
And that's just self-reported. There's no documentation or anything.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't think, I mean, I can reach out to the human resource listserv, but I have not heard from any communities that have everyone show proof. They just refer employees to the CDC guidelines. And they follow what protocol they fall under.
Okay.
Just in my
I
own,
just don't know how we're gonna babysit everyone at this point.
No, I'm not suggesting you are. I just want to point out that that's like a
Yeah.
critical decision point. So I wonder how you handle it.
unrelated to COVID, but I can ask people, employees or future employees to provide me documentation with vaccination, say, for example, for hepatitis B. And that's not a violation of their, keep the information secure, but as somebody in the organization has the right to ask you that. Absolutely.
And that isn't just because you're in a health related field.
I don't think so, no.
No, in the private sector. you can.
Yeah. So is anybody aware of other communities or what other government entities currently require employees to state their vaccination status? And are there different rules for vaccinated versus unvaccinated people, say for compensation if they have to take time off? Is anybody aware of that?
No, that's one thing that I was struck by in this revision, that
Yeah.
it seems like a dicey statement to make, that if you're unvaccinated, then you don't get compensated. Right?
It's kind of the way I read it, yeah.
But I mean, that's getting into the weeds if we're just.
Yeah.
gonna have a policy
It doesn't actually explicitly say that.
Well, it just says
but
vaccinated employees.
It does say what the condition is for vaccinated employees, but it does not
Not
say.
mentioned.
That's right. So,
And, you know, and just so you know, I'd kind of put that out there for discussion. Not saying it's the best idea, but I thought it was worth discussing. I'd heard from at least one of you, the last couple of weeks about, just speculating, should the town require vaccinations? And I don't think I don't know, but I hadn't heard anyone propose to go that, to go that route. But this language was intended to kind of, say there's some benefit to being vaccinated from employment, employment benefit status. So we might not want to go there. It could be a big can of worms, but I did think it was worth putting in for discussion.
A question I would have too is vaccinated and boosted or vaccinate? Like, where do you draw the line there? You know?
well, yeah, well,
I don't want to open up more cans of worms, but these are just things that, as you guys are discussing, I'm thinking of.
yeah, seems
The
to me that
CDC really hasn't,
Yeah, so if we're following
the
CDC.
CDC hasn't really said too much about that. And there's like so many different permutations of boostering. If you mix your booster, if you get the same one, and so there's gonna be an awful lot of data crunching before they have any sort of.
Yeah, I think I would also say that for those that are not comfortable with the CDC protocols and still feel threatened, I think more care is needed than to just say, we have to learn to live with it. This is just the way it is. I don't know if there's a different way they can be approached so that I think it's great if you say they can work from home if they're, concerned about it, but I just think the way that you reach those people is not necessarily to just say, well, CDC says it's okay, so we're doing that. So I don't know what the solution is, but I know there are people that are still concerned. So to the extent we can try to help them understand how this policy protects them, then I think that would be a good thing.
How do we do that?
Well, I think it starts with acknowledging their concerns and not being dismissive. You know.
I think we can do that to an extent, but as this pandemic keeps going on, how long can we accommodate that? As was already brought up, do we, do this thing isn't going to be ending, this year or next year. I think it's going to be going on like the flu. How do we determine, like, how are we going to accommodate this for, a while? When we have certain employees that are concerned, and I think it's important to address it to a point based upon what other communities are doing across the Commonwealth.
As the health agent pointed out in the email he sent earlier today, the offices are very large. The building is large relative to the workforce. The hallways are large. There's a lot of, if someone wants to go into their office, stay there, there's plexiglass, there's distancing, there's no, any of the departmental communication can all happen remotely, whether by phone, email, Zoom. There's lots and lots of protections built in. I think that part of what you hear, and maybe just the sense of it's not, the town has taken many steps, and it is very safe. It's a very safe working environment.
I think it's also important to note that we don't know who's coming in and out of the building. So we're talking about employees here. You don't know the citizens coming in, where they've been, what their vaccination status is, if they were ill, because there's no longer contact tracing going on. So I just want to point that out as well.
So Stephanie, when you point, excuse me, when you point that out, is essentially what you're saying is that there's a risk factor that we can't even define, that we have no way of defining that.
Yeah, and that's really important, because I think the town has really, I feel like management as well, we've gone kind of above and beyond here, but at the same time, it's hard to know, like you said, Rick, who's coming in and out. I mean, I don't know where the people have been, and unfortunately, that's a risk that we take, but we have all these plexiglass set up, and we, follow all these things to, help with the situation the best we can.
If we need to use a protocol like any type of music venue or something, or things like that use now, which is that you got to show a vaccine card to come in the building and wear a mask. I think that would go over. But at some point, everybody's got to get rid of it. Vaccine in particular.
And I will share my own experience. I was very, very sick with a COVID, and unfortunately, I've had to kind of overcome that and come outside my comfort zone and try different things. It's not, the approach I wanted to take, but at some point in time, I had to do that, knowing that I'm still a long hauler, and I want to put that out there publicly. So it's not that I was not affected by this at all. So this is coming from someone who was affected greatly.
Yeah, no, you have real firsthand experience.
So I just want to put that out there, that I'm not just, speaking, there's a reason why I'm speaking the way I am, and the research I've done on the listserv and to my colleagues across the Commonwealth.
So, I know that, people needing to quarantine themselves has had, some impact on operations of this building, you know, of the offices in this building. As, you know, as the motion that was just made, does that adequately address, you know, the operations, will that help in the operations of this building?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think it will. I am, even though I think what you proposed, Rick, and Archie, what you seconded, in my opinion, is where we should get to. I will say I have some concern about if you go that far tonight, just from a process standpoint. As you know, there's a lot of questions about this. People, you know, some people on staff are watching it very closely. And I did circulate some draft changes, and I did make clear when I sent it around, I said the board could do this, they could do something different than this, they could do nothing. You know, I made it clear the board has kept all your options open, but from a process standpoint, I am a little bit concerned that if you were to go so far as to basically jettison this, where it has been, you know, circulated a number of times, a draft, once it's approved, you know, these draft red lines, do some number of people feel like, you know, what the heck? Like, why did you know, it could affect people's trust. And so I feel like what I put forward, even though there's a couple of things like you could, you know, definitely.
Angus, the COVID world changes by the hour. So we can't be inflexible. I mean, things get worse, things get better, then they get better. They change literally week to week. From South Africa now, cases are dropping like South Africa is a great place to be now, and 2 weeks ago it was like the end of the earth. So we have to be able to be flexible. Say that we can't change something is don't go there, because everybody's changing everything every minute. It's okay. It's acceptable to make changes. That's okay. Everybody's making changes.
So Angus, you think that there would be a loss of trust?
I mean, part of what I'm thinking about, to be very honest, Rick, is tomorrow morning. And, you know, I've got a meeting in the morning. It's like, if this is not handled right, it will submarine our entire office, because that's how this goes. That is how this has gone many times in the last 2 years, where either Stephanie or I lose hours, like hearing the blowback. And so, you know, my concern is if you go further than what I've, you know, or substantially further than what I've kind of put in front of you and what I circulated to staff, it's then immediately back on me and Stephanie to explain it all. And that means we gotta, I don't know, pull an all-nighter, or I don't know what we have to do to be ready by the moment the building opens tomorrow, because I'm telling you, that's how this goes. And Stephanie sees it more than I do. But that's my concern, is that, you know, I sent something around to all staff. I said, this is something that me and the town accountant, business manager, and the health agent have recommended. The board will consider this. So I feel like everyone's gotten notice on the table for discussion. And while I think, you know, what you're saying, I think is the right answer, but from a process standpoint, I am a little concerned about the, you know, the actual blowback that it's going to generate. And, you know, and I mean, do I have to cancel my morning meeting with a housing consultant because at 10 a.m. I'm going to be in the thick of COVID policy, because that's how this has gone again and again. And other, you know, I'm trying to maintain some normalcy in terms of workload and other meetings and other projects. And
Okay, all right. So I hear what you're saying, Angus. And I mean, you know, I want us to get to the most rational point, but more than that, you know, what I want is I want the people here to be and stay healthy. And, you know, I want everybody here to be okay. And I also want this place to operate. And because it has to, you know, and so, I mean, I'm fine with, if you believe that running with what you propose as a policy is, you know, it will certainly still make things, you know, keep things as safe as they can be, and will keep this operation working, then, you know, I can withdraw my motion. I'm not married to it. You know, I just want us to get to a place where things work and where everybody's healthy and safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be my preference, is to stick with the fairly, you know, surgical changes that we've put in here. And I think if on page 120 there of the packet, the reference to vaccinated employee, you know, that might be a bridge too far. That might be opening a can of worms that we're not ready to do at this point in terms of the whole policy of paying people while they're self-quarantining. You know, so that's something I would be happy to see that, you know, get jettisoned. I did think it was important to put on the table for discussion because, you know, I'm trying to be mindful of the taxpayer's dollar and you know, paying people to not come to work is something that, you know, I think people can live with.
Angus, then you're really getting into, well, prove that you're if you're having a policy where you literally, someone gets paid versus someone that doesn't get paid for taking time off, depending upon their vaccine status, that's really, well, people are gonna, you talk about blowback, you're gonna have to have, people are gonna give you blowback big time on that if you don't take their word for it. I mean, that's gonna be, I don't like that segregation of dealing with different sets of people that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that one I more put in for discussion. I think the rest of it.
Yeah, but we don't need things just to talk about. We need a solution. We don't sit here to just talk about the world. We need to come up with a plan. Don't give us stuff just for discussion. Give us what you want.
Okay, well, other than that one single word change, that's what I did, Archie.
Okay, so I withdraw my motion, and I mean, I'm happy to live with what's been proposed here, and.
Well, I think if we're gonna do that, then we need to clarify, you know, it says for quarantine for unvaccinated employees. I think
There's two different policies here, Rick.
I think it should be stated for vaccinated employees, this, whatever the condition is, you know.
Well,
Otherwise.
okay, so the only difference is compensation. So
then we'd have to copy the CDC guidelines.
This isn't the only thing.
I just think it needs to be stated clearly in the policy how vaccinated employees are handled versus un. So CDC says you don't have to quarantine. So let's just put that in there. So it's very clear, you know, whatever category you're in, what the expectation is.
Yeah, so for instance, on the next page, the one from the town of East Bridgewater, if there's exposure to a close contact, no symptoms, vaccinated personnel, no quarantine required. However, you should still monitor for symptoms for 14 days following an exposure. And if you experience symptoms, isolate yourself, seek testing, and contact your healthcare provider. Do you think, is that what you're talking about, Wendy? Something like that?
I think it's important that everybody knows what's expected of them.
It's otherwise there's a gap there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we can copy and paste the CDC guidelines then, because that's what East Bridgewater did.
Yeah, that's the whole point, that we want to base it on CDC, let's just. put it
Yeah,
up
so
there.
then every time it, yeah. So every time it changes,
Yeah, but see, but we want to, if that's the case, then we don't want to reference what we say here tonight, we want to reference the CDC guidelines.
But Angus just said he didn't want to do that.
But if we don't do that, then every time the CDC got,
So-
every time things change, then
we have to update it.
we have to revise it here, and that doesn't make sense.
Well, how else will employees know what it is? I mean, if you want to have a, specific protocol, you have to say what the conditions are. Or you go with a general, like you said. I mean, you can't do both.
You can't have it halfway.
Yeah. So if we are gonna go with this specific protocol, I would recommend under the sunset date, saying this protocol as may be amended by the town manager instead of having it be the select board. Otherwise, you could wait 3 weeks to make.
Okay, that's fine, that's an easy way to do it. Angus, does that work for you?
Yep.
It's effective here?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, this board shouldn't be having to make every single, acknowledge every single change in decision in recommendations by the CD. It's just not practical. And
It impacts operations.
right. Okay, so given all that, how do we,
So what do we got? Yeah.
So under quarantine, just have a few sentences for a vaccinated employee, what you read from the other policy, and then unvaccinated, that whole paragraph can stay.
okay,
What about that compensation part?
I think it should be any employee. I mean, we don't.
Yeah, to
we
take
don't
out the word
encourage people to get
vaccinated.
vaccinated,
yeah,
so-
just remove the word vaccinated there.
Okay.
I mean, unless it becomes a problem, then you reevaluate it.
If there's only one employee who is not vaccinated, it's not going to become a problem. If in fact that's the case.
Some companies do require proof of vaccination.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a step we could take if it was an issue, but it doesn't seem like it is at this point.
Yeah, it's small enough.
I don't want to go
But that is, it is an interesting question. Are there other municipalities, do we know if there are other municipalities that are requiring either vaccination or proof of vaccination? If
I think the city of Boston.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, larger cities.
Yeah.
So I sent that out on the Mass Municipal Human Resource website listserv. And when I did that last week, no communities were requiring that. I can check back to see if anyone's changed that. I should say the communities that responded. So it goes out to every community.
So you got 350 responses?
I did not get 350. I got about 100 and something responses.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's
So I mean, I got a lot, and I forwarded probably only 5 or 6 to Angus because he gets too many emails.
Okay. All right, so, because this is a policy that we voted on before, we have to. So we're going to accept what Angus proposed here, with the exception of removing the word vaccinated on the second page under compensation during time off. And we're going to change on the sunset date to read this protocol as may be amended by the town manager, shall be in effect through June 30, 2022. Is that?
And add a description under quarantine for vaccinated.
Okay, that's right, and then add what Stephanie read, which was in the East Bridgewater, I think it was East Bridgewater policy, which Stephanie noted was poached from the CDC.
Yeah, and I've got that all written up, and as you can, got all that.
Okay. Is that right?
Is that a motion?
Yeah, that was a motion.
All right, second.
All right. I hope there's no further discussion. All in favor?
Hey, I really do appreciate your action on this. I think it's a good set of changes, and it's also, you know, in terms of this is something that we can very easily make the adjustments, repost it, and communicate it, you know, quickly and effectively to staff. Whereas if you'd gone a different way, you know, I just think it could have created a lot of questions that just take time away from other work.
Tell me that working from home for like 2 years. Well, the people working in frozen stores.
Yeah.
They haven't been working from home.
Right.
The Amazon people aren't working from home, and they're delivering stuff to you while you work from home. Don't order from Amazon.
Okay. Especially the FY23 budget policy direction.
Page what?
133. 133.
Okay, thanks.
It's hard to find it. This is on paper.
Yeah.
The first paragraph, minor typo, but we got the wrong fiscal year there at the bottom of the first paragraph.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Thanks.
You know, so in the first paragraph, we need to specify percent. I'm seeing there's going to be a bunch of things causing upward pressure on operations this year. So it seems like to me.
I agree.
And so, you know, I think the highest number we can reasonably put in there is you know, the limit, which is 2.5%. And hope that we'll be back. What do you think?
That's what even Angus said he couldn't believe I was done.
Yeah. Okay.
And it'll be 2.5, and we'll have new growth and,
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there was that email you sent this afternoon, Angus, about the retirement. Was that another 88,000? Was that the number?
That's right. Yeah.
that should be like swimming in dough. The market went up 21% in this year. How is that pension fund doing? Because literally the S&P has gone up 21% in 2021, and 2021 wasn't even a banner year. So yeah, last year was even better. But so I'd like to see how that pension fund is performing. It just seems crazy that it's.
That's a good.
If it's that bad in a good year, what's it going to be when we have a bad performing stock market? That's going to be killer.
Yeah, right about a year ago, or not quite a year ago. I think it was last January, or just past January, when we got the FY22 number. We had talked about inviting ERRS in. Ended up that that change was driven in part by, miscalculation on their part. I think, I'd be happy if the board wants to, and I think you probably would invite someone from Essex Regional in to talk about that very question. I think that would be appropriate. I think they'd be happy to do it. We don't need to, put them on the defensive, but just say, look, this is a huge increase and we want to understand it. And how does it compare with the other communities, and how much of this is driven by changes in our, payroll?
Do you think it's a demographic thing, Angus, rather than?
Well, I'm sure there's multiple factors, but yeah, I mean, if we hire a new pensionable worker, which we did, there was a new full-time water employee this year, so that's going to affect things. Those things all, are baked into it. But 11.4%, and just in round numbers, let's say you do end up saying 2.5% of the non-school budget. This is a round number, but that's about $200,000. So if you put yourself in my shoes and with Stephanie's shoes, of having to deliver a budget with a bottom line increase of no more than roughly 200 grand, and Essex Regional right there is $88,000. It just shows how difficult any target's going to be to meet. But we got to have I'm not suggesting you don't do that. I'm just saying it's it's going to push some belt tightening elsewhere, which is fine. That's exactly what the budget process is for. Managing scarcity. There's not going to be enough to do everything.
Yeah. I think the retirement board has just PO'd at us because we thought the mistake last year. No.
They weren't happy.
Okay, so does anybody have any other questions or comments about what
On the second item, Rick, last meeting you guys had talked about striking that entirely, and if you want to do that, that's great. I just kind of put in an alternate to that because I do think that there are some things, and I don't know that they amount to a huge amount in the grand scheme of things. Things like the Zoom accounts, and those are now going to need to be in the operating budget, where in the past they've been under CARES. But one area that we've definitely seen what's turning into a pretty significant expense is exactly this kind of remote work and more people having laptops, and it was great when we had CARES to run all through. But now that we're paying that out of the operating budget, that is starting to add up. So I thought that having the language along the lines of what I drafted in item 2 was good, just to say, to departments, if there are things in your costs that are being driven by COVID, it's a good opportunity to help understand that.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a valid point. And if nothing else, it'll help us.
I know, I don't know
that this understand if there are things that end up falling off the side because we had to respond to COVID, at least it will understand why, and we can explain to other people why that happened.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely got some enhanced cleaning, certainly at the library. I know Mike Goutet has reported it's created enormous challenges for his department in getting into people's homes to do some of the required testing they have to do for lead, where they actually have to get into people's homes. And so he said COVID has created real challenges because people are much less willing to let them in. And so they have to contact that many more homeowners to get the required number that they need to test. There's things like that nothing else I think would be interesting. I don't think they really affect how we're going to budget, but I think they're illuminating.
Okay.
Also, actually, not to go on and on, but that, like with regard to the clinics, the clinics that we're participating in, up to a point have been anticipated those would be reimbursed by CARES or by FEMA, after, and there's insurance reimbursements, but if at some point in the future that type of level of service starts getting built into the operating budget, I think we want to be clear about that.
Not that this is relevant to this particular topic right now, but we've seen the reimbursement from Amesbury.
No.
Okay, just curious. Okay, well, I moved that we adopt the budget policy direction as written here.
Second.
Any thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I think the one you added on the staffing structure is good. So that gives us a way to fund changes that are recommended. I don't have anything else.
Great.
Okay, great. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have, next item is notice regarding applicability of the Mbta communities legislation to West Newbury.
Oh, that's actually you skipped over the MVRTA.
Oh, okay.
It's a lot of transit authority.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Report on research regarding the MVRTA levels of service process to seek potential changes. Yeah, I actually had a question about this immediately. So I understand that, you met, Jim, you met with the new director of the MVRTA, and, he was proposing sort of an expansion of, well, the potential of a vehicle supplied by them, a van essentially supplied by them, or perhaps maybe there was reference to expansion of the ring and ride service, but I'm sure this is not something that would happen in a short time frame. But it seems to me we should be lobbying with them to find out what it would take to actually have a bus service this town, to actually have a bus come through West Newbury.
I mean, we talked about essentially where we're at,
Yeah.
what we're looking at for future service, and then other stuff.
Okay.
And I think the main thing that we talked about would be kind of what we're at now. And the numbers that we have is on that last 136. It
I was
kind of,
surprised at how few residents are
Yeah.
using all those trips.
so it's $2 for a ride anywhere in the MBRTA district, essentially. So any city or town you want to go to from West Newbury, you can go and it costs $2.
I can go to, I don't know, Drake I'm gonna say it. Whatever.
Lawrence or Andover,
Really?
those
For
are the farthest
$2?
for $2.
And is this well understood by residents?
So you could, for $2.
Potentially,
you could go to
no.
a New Balance store and get a new pair of running shoes.
Correct.
But then I have to go like that.
No, but then you do a $2 ride back. It's $4 plus the running shoe costs. It really comes down to how well is this program known in West Newbury, which I don't think
it's known at all.
Yeah.
This is like, news to me.
So it's focused on senior citizens and people with disabilities. You can't, if I lived in West Newbury, I couldn't just call and get a $2 ride to go anywhere. So it's aimed specifically at that demographic. And really what Noah was trying to say is the more we can get people to use that and connect them to the lines that already exist. So if there's somebody who needs to get to the shopping center, but wants to take a trip down to downtown Newburyport at the same time, they can get dropped off in a location, take a bus back. that kind of thing. I think that's really what he was trying to show, what we already have as an option.
Yeah.
Because nobody utilizes it as it is. Right now, the closest bus services end at Rivers Edge Plaza in Haverhill, and then the
Sport Plaza.
in Newburyport. So those are the two closest bus from West Newbury. There is a bus that it's like out of service that runs down Main Street. I think it's it's only a one way. I think it's just getting from Newburyport to Haverhill, and it's a cut through.
Right.
So I presume it would be what you're thinking for a bus route would be something from Rivers Edge Plaza to Newburyport.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, sort of completing the loop. So currently they go from Newburyport, loop over through Salisbury, end up in Amesbury, and then there's a bus in Amesbury that goes over through Merrimack, over into Haverhill, to somewhere in Haverhill, and then eventually that connects down to Rivers Edge Plaza. It's whatever the River Plaza. Riverside, I think it's Riverside.
Yeah.
Something like that. In Haverhill, and then that would be the logical connection back to Newburyport. If there was a bus, that came through Groveland and West Newbury, and I'm sure that's not the kind of thing that they would introduce easily or readily, but
also
it seems to me that should be the long-term goal, because, particularly, given changes that you hope happen relative to transportation because of the reality of climate change, that, that we, at some point, people understand the reason to use public transportation where they can. But maybe we just don't have the population.
So that's part of it, is the population, the use. Additionally, Groveland would have to sign on as well.
Right.
Because if Groveland doesn't sign on, they're not going to run a bus to the edge of West Newbury and back out.
Absolutely. Groveland. But the thing is that, Groveland is a somewhat larger community, and they've got one or two significant 40B projects currently in the works.
Yeah.
I don't know where those are located. I don't know if they're in a place where the bus that ran that route would service them, but we have, this corridor along Main Street is the population core for West Newbury, and you think there in the last 5 years or 6 years, there's River Meadow, there's Daily Drive, and there's Follinsby, and each of those is 50-something units, which in the grand scheme of things, 150 units is trivial compared to a city like Haverhill. But this is our population corridor is Main Street.
I guess the question will come down to, they'd have to do a study of some kind to see if there is a population that is interested in that.
Yeah.
Especially just that interim point from Haverhill to Newburyport, cutting down Main Street. I think the assessment is the best way to look at it. But right now, our assessment's $4,000. That's off of the cherry sheet. We're giving $29,000 to the MBTA. If we wanted to, we could give that to the MVRTA instead. So that's an additional $30,000 on top of what we already give to the MVRTA. That may be because we have expanded service. That may be because the ringer ride, for example, in Groveland is nothing, and ours is $2 per ride. So is that something we want to look at instead of, in the interim, is to get a no-cost ringer ride for our residents and make sure that's utilized and pump that up to see if that service is needed.
I think the first thing we need to do is make sure people are aware of this, because you can't really get an accurate assessment of how well it's used if people aren't aware of it, And by the same token, this is misleading, because if there was a bus route available, maybe many more people would use it. So
Potentially,
it's kind of hard to know where to start with it.
But 7, 5, 7, and 6 residents.
The same people.
It's the exact same people every single year who use it. And it dropped off for 1 year for some reason, and then
probably COVID, right? 336.
It's the same people.
Yeah. It's just they're taking less trips.
Yeah.
Whether those are hospital trips to Anna Jake's or Haverhill, whether those are doctor's appointments that they couldn't do because you couldn't have in-person doctor's appointments in 2020, whatever the reason.
So 5 residents made 336 rides in that year, so that's about 70.
I would assume it's one ride and one ride. So that's
Oh, it's a half.
so it's times 2 or divided by 2. I would assume.
Yeah, I think, I was thinking that too, Jim.
And what's the geographic area that this is good for? said
It's
Lawrence?
so it goes so on the eastern side, it would go all the way out to Salisbury. Western would go all the way to Methuen, Andover. As south would go, I think Rowley.
Would we go down to Raleigh?
Yeah, Rowley and cutting over to,
Oxford? We go to Oxford?
yep, Oxford, us,
Wow.
North Andover.
But they probably don't have a bus either.
Bus service is mainly around, so Greater Lawrence, Methuen, Andover, North Andover, Lawrence,
Yeah.
Haverhill, Newburyport. That's the main bus lines that exist currently. With the biggest amount being Greater Lawrence.
Yeah.
Because they have the most lines, they have the most population, the densest populations, so.
Yeah, that big turnout.
The other thing was that with the new program that they're gonna be implementing in March, it's free bus service anywhere that there's a bus route currently. And that's because they want to do a pilot program, because it was really the only lines that survived in the sense of population and ridership were the free lines that were existing in Lawrence already. And so they want to see if that can multiply out throughout the communities to see if that'll catch and get people riding the bus again. They're going to be doing rebranding. They're going to paint the buses. Local artists are coming in to do that. So they're really trying to make the buses visible as opposed to background noise.
Yeah, great.
So how could we push use of the available bus lines, using the Ring Ride to get, do you have any ideas on how to?
I think it would be in conjunction with the Council on Aging, just reaching out to any person above a certain age and just saying,
65, I mean, what technically?
well, they say seniors, so I would assume it's 65. But we can reach out to anyone 64 and up, because I have a list in my office and we can mail it out to people and say, hey, this service is available. Did you know about it? It costs $2. Are you interested? We can even ask people to respond to say, would you be interested in using this service? If it was free, would you use it more? Like, we can ask those we can kind of do a survey.
Yeah, I think that anything we can do to promote the use of these services would be great.
And Noah's very interested in getting us involved as well. As he's pointed out to myself and Angus multiple times, this is the first time West Newbury's ever gone to a meeting for the MBRTA. So he's very excited about that. We only get one vote at the table. It's by population, so the Lawrence representative gets like 20 plus votes with their vote. So really, if Methuen, Lawrence, and Haverhill voted together as a block, we couldn't do anything. But if they're ever divided on something, our one vote makes a difference. So, but also it's influence in the sense of being able to speak with other people in the area. It's communication building. It's community building, as it were. So really, hey, West Newbury exists.
I think if we could show some significant increased uses in this by us, it's up to us to promote it more. Then we go back in a year or two and say, what about something more?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm just thinking about the route the route from Newburyport to Haverhill, from Port Plaza to Riverside Plaza. That wouldn't just be servicing West Newbury and Grove, because I bet there is a reasonable number of people who have reason on a relatively regular basis to go from Newburyport to Haverhill. And right now, for them, it's probably pretty darn inconvenient, because they have to take a bus that loops all around Salisbury, ends up in Amesbury, do a transfer in Amesbury, take that to, I'm not sure where that bus goes to in Haverhill, and then another bus to get to wherever else they want to go to in Haverhill. And, you know, so say if they wanted to go to Riverside Plaza, you know, so they'd probably have to take 3 buses. I bet it's an hour and a half minimum, to get from Port Plaza to,
So it's essentially downtown Newburyport to downtown Haverhill. That's the route.
yeah,
If you want to go to River Edge Plaza, you'd need to get on another bus when you get back to downtown Haverhill. So there's no direct route to the 2 plazas,
yeah.
but I mean, you'd link the 2 hospitals if you linked River Edge Plaza.
Right, exactly. I mean, that would be, that, you know, maybe use the hospital as a reference point, or, you know, maybe it would be from downtown, you know, up to High Street, over by the hospital to Port Plaza to through West Newbury, Groveland. I don't know, you know, we're getting in the weeds here, but
I think
it seems to me that it would make sense, and it's hard for me to believe that there wouldn't be.
Part of it is we've never been part of the conversation as well. I think that's the biggest thing, is that if we're showing up and we're part of the conversation, when they created a bus route, they never said, oh, we should run something through West Newbury, because nobody from West Newbury was like, hey, you should do this.
Right, yeah.
So I think that's just the tertiary being in the room.
Yeah.
To say, oh, wouldn't this be a better route than that route,
Right.
as it were?
I also had a question on the leasing of the vehicle.
Yeah.
So somebody like from Council on Aging staff would be the driver? Is that
Yes.
how it works?
Correct. So this is a program that's very underutilized from what Noah was explaining to us in this area. Cape Cod, it's very used because, as he pointed out, Barnstable County has like the 3rd highest elder population in the country, outside of like 2 counties in Florida. So like every council on aging on the Cape, like rents a van through this program, and they staff the driver, but now you're not having to pay for a new van, because in 3-4 years, our van is going to give out. And so the idea would be, if we could start a process like this now, in 2 to 3 years, we'd have a van ready to go that we would lease. And so we wouldn't have to worry about getting a new van every single time that van dies.
So, I mean, is that something you pursue? That seems like.
I mean, I would absolutely make that recommendation right now, that we should absolutely try to start that process. It does. It does. It seems like something that shouldn't be offered, but it absolutely is a program that just no one is taking advantage of, because no one was there to say, hey, this is a good program, we should do this.
So what do we have to do to get in the queue for?
Well, it's a conversation with Noah and myself and Angus, and we'll say, what do we need to do to get us on the list?
And, you know, and when we met last week, we definitely, our ears perked up big time on that, because it was, I mean, very clearly relevant, and something that could be a real cost avoidance when we get to replacing the COA van in 4 or 5 years. And so, yeah, you know, he didn't spell out for us like exactly what steps, but he definitely, you know, and it sounds like he is pretty new there. He's only been there a few months himself. But he said that, you know, I think we said that we were updating you guys tonight, and you know, when we let him know, we definitely want to explore this and what do we need to do. I think he'll put us on the right path. But you know, he did say, oh, Jim's memo said that, you know, it'd be kind of 18 months at the soonest. There are no promises. You know, it's a federal program. They have to get the vehicle, these kinds of things. But you got to start somewhere. And I agree with what Jim said. I don't see any downside of let's initiate the process and see where it takes us. When Stephanie and I had our exit interview with Teresa on Friday, which was her last day, we did ask her about this program and whether it's something she was familiar with, and whether her department had ever looked at in the past. And she was familiar with it, and you know, it's just not something that's ever been pursued. You know, I think she did say, you know, There's no guarantee it's a new van, maybe it's a repurposed van, this kind of thing. So, you know, we'll want to learn more about it, but initially it sounds very promising.
My other thought is even if it is a repurposed van and our van isn't dead, by the time we get a repurposed van, we can use the repurposed van and have a spare van.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. In the last town I worked in, our transit was shuttles, and you know, and it's great. There's nothing wrong with a repurposed van. So
Up for $1 a year.
Where do they repurpose from?
Just another, so it was a van that was sold from another municipality, or it was sold from another transit service that they're no longer using as like their main van to transport ADA compliance or stuff like that. So like,
So that, if it's a repurposed vehicle, I guess I didn't see that. So it's, you know, I was imagining that if it's a new vehicle 2 or 3 years from now, it would be an electric vehicle, but this would probably not be. I mean, everything's gonna be.
Yeah,
got it.
I would say most likely it'll be whatever they have available.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most regional services are not transitioning to electric immediately. One thing we talked about at the last meeting, at the advisory board meeting, is transitioning to electric vehicles and what's that gonna cost, and they're gonna price it out for everybody. So when the MBRTA goes all electric and the repurposed van that we have dies, or we need to get a new one because this one's aging, I think that would be like, that'd be the next step, is that we're gonna get a gas vehicle at first, and then the next iteration will get most likely an electric vehicle, as long as the other regional transit authorities are transferring over. But I think overall, I mean,
Where does MBRTA stand on for themselves? They're on for the buses, not just their vans, but the buses. I mean, because there are bus services around the country that are making the transition.
yeah, no, they're looking into it to see what it'll cost and if it's feasible.
Yeah.
We are in a winter state. So having a battery operated vehicle is harder. And so as long as they can find a resilient bus that can do it, I think that's their plan. Because they know, I mean, they were very lucky to have locked in a rate. I forget how much it is per gallon that they have, and they locked it in last summer before gas prices really took off. And so they're benefiting from it very well. I don't think the gas company is going to allow for them to lock in a rate again for a full year, seeing in how drastically gas prices have changed.
Yeah.
So I think they know if you can take that off the table and not have to pay that ever-changing price, long-term sustainability is much easier.
Yeah.
Noah's a very intelligent man. I think he knows the system very well. I think he knows a lot of federal programs that we locally had no idea about. I think he'd worked in the system for 15 years, so I think he's a very good benefit to have in the region.
Well,
Started
I'm glad you engaged. It's good. Great. Okay, we're on to the notification regarding the applicability of MBTA communities legislation to West Newbury. And essentially what that says is that communities that are designated as MBTA communities, meaning that they either have a transit station or are within
transit adjacent.
Transit adjacent, need to put in zoning, higher density zoning districts, what is it, 15 houses per acre. They need to add a zoning district, a reasonably sized zoning district for at least 15 living units per acre. But it also wasn't clear to me whether we actually fall into, despite the fact that we are adjacent to Haverhill, across the river, which has a transit station, over on the other side of town, and we're adjacent to Newburyport, which has a transit station, on the other side of town, but there's this within a half-mile limitation that they put in there. So it wasn't clear to me whether or not it's actually even applicable. Like, apparently we would have to explain that, and I'm not saying we should or should not have a zoning, I'm not saying we should or should not have a zoning district, a higher density zoning district like that. It's just, it wasn't clear to me that it's actually applicable to us because we're not within, the boundary or the border of West Newbury and Haverhill or across the river in any event, but, we're not within half a mile of the transit station.
So the half-mile rule is, I guess the best example would be if the Newburyport train station was like within a half a mile of our border,
Right.
we would have to put that housing area there.
Yeah.
It breaks it down to three. It's if you have a transit, you have to have it within a half a mile. If you are adjacent and it's within a half a mile, you have to have it within that half a mile. And then there's us. We just have to have it on a main area or somewhere heading to that transit location. We still
Okay, so
have
that
to
wasn't-
do it.
That wasn't clear. Okay.
No,
This is, yeah, Jim had looked into I'd asked him to look into this. Leah's also obviously been doing a lot of work on this, but I've got the language from the draft guidelines right here that Jim had pulled last week. And it says that, that MBTA communities with no land area within 0.5 miles of a transit station, the multifamily district should, if feasible, be located in an area with reasonable access to a transit station based on existing street patterns, pedestrian connections and bicycle lanes, or in an area that otherwise is consistent with the Commonwealth Sustainable Development Principles. For example, near an existing downtown or village center, near a regional transit authority bus stop or line, or in a village with existing underutilized facilities that can be redeveloped into new multifamily housing. So the requirement is applicable to West Newbury, even though we don't have any land within 0.5 miles.
Of course, if it was on Main Street and we had an MDRTA bus that came through on an hourly basis, then we would have it lit.
there you go.
That might not win you a lot of votes to, but yeah, there's a lot to unpack in this legislation. More recently, Leah's, there's language in there suggesting a minimum zoned build out of as many as 750 units. So, we have some real questions. Myself and Leah have been in regular contact, and our plan is she's got a planning board meeting tomorrow night, and I was going to hear from you guys tonight. She'll hear from them tomorrow night, and then send over some questions toward the end of the week to Chris Clutchman, who's the administrator up at the HD. Just for the record, Chris was actually the town planner I hired when I was in Westford. So I know Chris really well. We worked together for a couple of years, and I've known her for, probably 15 years or more. So she's very good. She's very, very smart, very, very competent, and very responsive. So I think we just want to make sure the questions we send are, that we send them having absorbed everything and not ask questions that they've already answered, just to be respectful of their time. But it seems like there's you have to have like a plan.
Angus, you said 750 units, but this doesn't say anything about that. It just says we don't have to have a plan for any kind of units. It just says that you have to have an area reasonably sized.
Well, it requires a zoning change.
It requires a zoning change.
Exactly. You have to have a zoned area, but it doesn't say you actually have to have a building.
Yeah, we don't have to build the units.
No.
No, but in terms of how they're gonna determine reasonably sized, they're gonna look at what's the, build out potential. Not that that would necessarily need to happen, obviously. But they're gonna look at, so if it's 15 unit per acre minimum density, to get to 750, you're talking about zoning 50 acres of land at 15 units an acre. That's obviously not something that's just gonna like go by without comment. It's raising a lot of eyebrows is what I'm trying to say. And the guidelines are draft and it's the public comment period. So, we'll see where this goes.
Additionally, deadlines. One of the deadlines is that we have to have the plan in by Angus, or just like
there's got to be a plan basically by the end of the next calendar year, or this, December 31st of 2022. I think the timing for bringing zoning forward for adoption, I think that was in one of the emails. I think it was some amount of time after that. I don't remember when it was, but then there is something we do have to file this coming May. I looked at that online. It didn't look like a big lift. It's basically, I think the state is looking to pin down who's the kind of responsible party who's going to kind of take ownership for bringing this forward. But there might be more to the form, Jim, the one that you sent me this afternoon. But I couldn't get to what's next without hitting submit. So obviously I wasn't going to do that. But there is a form that's required to be submitted this May. And if you don't submit the form on time, you're deemed to be out of compliance until you do. And therefore ineligible for certain grant programs like MassWorks.
It's a very heavy-handed.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
It's interesting too that one of the provisions in there as well was that the zoning change would not require the 2/3 supermajority. It would require just a simple majority for a zoning change, which obviously
They really want to get this.
yeah.
Meaning they know it's going to be a hard lift for everybody.
I believe that law already passed. I think that's
already happened. That's for all zoning changes now. That's
correct.
Zoning changes?
Yes.
Oh.
I don't recall if it's all or just for housing, but they definitely
Housing, yes.
yeah. I think to upzone and to accommodate more density, I believe that was a statewide change that went to a simple majority instead of the 2/3. That was a kind of a centerpiece of the housing choice legislation.
Additionally, I also found out today there's an advisory board for the Mbta as well that we're members of, that we don't have a representative. So you guys know.
I'm sure we'll carry a lot of weight there.
All 175 representatives, yeah.
Right. We're probably, number 4 or 5 from the bottom in terms of size of the community.
Population wise.
Yeah, well,
Who would be bigger?
Well,
Oh,
I mean,
Essex,
smaller.
Essex,
I was
Essex,
gonna say
Essex
Essex
is
is smaller,
Essex
but
is
there's
smaller.
175 communities that are involved. So I was just figuring that there was probably another 2 or 3 that were smaller than us.
Essex is small.
Yeah, Essex is exactly.
Maybe Haunt.
Yeah. I wonder. I have pretty high density.
You might be right.
I think like that, like Dunstable, like those are like, we're the smallest. Us 4.
The haunting depends if there's been any mafia killings as well.
All right, moving on.
So, I do think, you guys can expect to receive, I think Lee is going to be putting together more of a summary report. She had sent something to me last week that was a couple of pages of notes, but she was clear it was just a working draft and not ready for prime time, but she is working toward, we are working toward a briefing that's gonna kind of speak to West Newbury specifically in terms of how we see this affecting the town, and what options the town has in terms of either striving for compliance or deciding not to, or anyhow, what kind of process we want to follow. One thing I talked with Rick, or I think Rick had suggested this when we talked about last week, is, depending what we learn from that, and if we have to have a kind of a bona fide plan by the end of the calendar year of next year, Rick had suggested we may want to think about proposing some funding in the spring to engage a consultant, because it can be expected to become a major initiative. It's going to raise a lot of eyebrows and a lot of questions, and if there is going to be an effort to comply, there's going to need to be a really major public involvement in order for that to have any viability.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough nut, I think.
I think the 40B was something, right? Just wait.
I mean, to me, honestly, I think if they're requiring something like this and a community does comply and has therefore created zoned land for higher density housing, to me, it's kind of outrageous that they might still be subject to 40B. That's the thing. It'd be one thing if you were doing this and bring it to the voters and saying, hey, if we do this, at least we're controlling where the growth goes. But the fact that you could theoretically do this and then still get hit by a 40B off in the, in the fields is kind of galling. But that's the way DHCD has been doing things for a long time.
Well, the other thing that's kind of interesting here is that there's no accounting, at least currently what's proposed, there's no accounting for communities that don't have municipal sewer. And we don't, and I'm guessing we never will. So you're forced into this really funny corner with, how do you deal with that aspect?
Well, in this case though, but you create an area, and unless someone, it has to be economically viable, and if the need to create a pocket sewage treatment plant makes it uneconomic for the developer. But it doesn't mean you can't comply with the intention of the statute.
Yeah. Yeah, you comply, but it's unrealistic. Can be done with it. At that point, you might as well put it over on the industrial side. Are you familiar with our industrial?
I was already thinking of it. I thought
It's down the other one. I'm not going there. I guess, anything more to say about that? Okay. So an update on CPC review of proposal for CPA admin funds. And Wendy, I think you're now chair of CPC, right?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. It's a hard one battle, but I prevail. Yeah, so, the vote was positive.
Yeah, good.
But, Angus can fill in the details on the sewer is a big issue.
Okay. Yep. Right.
And not wanting to spend any of this money unless, it's a go.
Right. I did have just a brief working meeting today, just 15 minutes with myself, Sam, Paul, and I had asked Lynn Spencer to sit in because I just think that, if I start having meetings and she's not there, then I just got to brief her on it. Like that's part of my frustration about why that was kind of carved out of the scope, because it takes time. All of that stuff takes time, and we just don't have a lot of time. So anyhow, we had a 15-minute meeting. I wanted to get with Sam and Paul just to make sure they were crystal clear on what we need to arrive at, and because we need to get to an answer. And basically, I did learn something new today that made me feel a little bit more comfortable on the tight tank issue, because basically, and I'm trying to find my notes, but the issue is the Board of Health can allow a tight tank where the design flow of the use doesn't exceed what was the design flow of the prior use. So that's where you could see in that email thread from probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, Paul was basically asking questions about historical use. That was all driven by, the Board of Health would need to make some assumptions on what the existing sanitary system was designed for. Now, we all know that it probably really wasn't designed. It was probably a cesspool or something like that. But for the purpose of Board of Health determining if they can allow a tight tank, they needed to have some baseline level of flow. And when they assumed that the building had been in use both as a dance hall was the second floor, and the first floor was being looked at from a use standpoint as a tavern, which was surprising, but that's how they were looking at it. Board of Health arrived at a very high design flow, much higher than you would ever actually need, something on the order of 1,600 gallons a day. The most amount of flow for any of the scenarios that I think are even within the realm of possibility, something on the order of 400 gallons is going to be more than enough, whether that was, office or municipal or a combination of public assembly and municipal office, or even residential. Any of those uses would fall under the threshold if I understood Paul correctly, and so the Board of Health will be talking it over. They meet tomorrow. Paul wasn't sure if they would get to it tomorrow, but they might. And if not, it's going to be in early January at their meeting. But they do want, they understand that that's what's needed, and that we can't tell them exactly what the use would be, but the assumption would be that it would be something that would be either allowable within the current zoning, or something like a municipal use, or even potentially a childcare, which is under the Dover Amendment can go into any zoning district. So that is something that's allowable as well. Not to say that's what the town would make it available for, but I guess what I'm saying, I hope we can get to an answer on the septic, fairly soon, like in the next.
How did they arrive? When you said the use as a dance hall for the upstairs and a tavern for the downstairs, how did they get? Was there actual historic use?
That's what I learned this today for the first time. So I was a little surprised too, but.
The upstairs was a dance place, right? Absolutely.
Well, that's potentially good news, right? I mean, that's a pretty high daily flow.
Yeah, I think it is.
Must have been a huge cesspool.
I would want to purchase property around there. From Brand just treating it now.
We did Sam started to allude to some of the zoning issues, and that, we were already bumping up against, both me and Paul both had, tight schedules today. So we both had other meetings we had to leave for. So, I told Sam, we're going to take that up on another day, but, he has raised some significant concerns about the fact that it's been vacant for more than 2 years and therefore has lost any grandfathering rights that it would have had. Because if you have a non-conforming use that it isn't present for more than 2 years, it loses the grandfathering. And so, you know, there are some other concerns on zoning that we need to delve into further.
But that does not need to be done ahead of Lynn's work, right? It's just a septic issue.
That's right. Yeah, that's, you know, part of her work. And, you know, as you saw from the packet, you know, there has been, oh, here are my notes. Looking everywhere. Yeah, let's see. Use for function hall upstairs, downstairs tavern. Sam estimated the number of seats. Yeah, so Paul said he presented it was board a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't been aware of that meeting. I wish I had, I would have sat in. But anyhow, so yeah, he said they came up with a design flow of 1,600 gallons, was probably way too high. And that there is an approved plan by the Board of Health for a tight tank at 207 gallons per day. But he thought that based on his reading of the regulations, that he did think the Board of Health could go above that, and thought something like 400 gallons per day would be way more than be needed for anything he could envision. But yeah, Sam went on to say grandfathering has been lost for non-conforming uses. That really, in his reading, the only allowable uses under the current zoning are 1 or 2 family housing, municipal use, or something protected by the Dover Amendment. So something like a childcare or educational use. So I did, you know, circle back with Lynn to let her know about the vote Thursday night, and you know, I'd like to modify that work scope so we can get an agreement with her so that you know, she can have a role, because I think, you know, for both because of her expertise, but also because she'll have some time to devote to it. I think it's going to be helpful to have her involved in order to get, you know, see any progress kind of week to week to week. Because if it's left just to staff, I mean, you know, we've taken a long way, but we're heading into budget season, and you know, as you know, we get a lot of other stuff. So, you know, it was said, and it should be said that there was, you know, Bob James did raise major concerns at the meeting Thursday night. You know, and I think was, you know, maybe over reading the board's proposal to suggest that somehow a decision's been made to turn it over. And I think, you know, Wendy and I think did a good job of saying, no, that's not, you know, the idea is to get this proposal to town meeting. You know, we talked that there could be a second proposal to town meeting. But there was some initial, you know, he raised some initial concern suggesting that somehow that decision had been made. And of course, that's not the case.
He was also under the impression that at the public hearing we had, this board had agreed to appoint a committee to evaluate uses, which I think was proposed by somebody in the audience, but that wasn't what we agreed on. So, yeah, I told him I didn't think that was the case, but yeah, he pretty strongly not against the administration.
We've been there, done that a million times.
Yeah, Gary Bill.
You even said that, yeah.
So in this meeting, Gary Bill said, yeah, we've already done that. So, yeah. But I mean, he voted in favor of it, so he came out.
Okay. Think we're done with that.
Yeah.
Got an update regarding the discussion of the school building committee regarding the use of native plantings. Did that topic?
Yeah,
were you
so,
able to bring that up?
well, prior to the meeting, I reached out to John Seymour and asked for it to be on the agenda. And he responded and said, well, did you get the superintendent's letter? And I said, we did. And, you know, so that we wanted to look into it. So he said it wasn't really on the agenda, but that we could talk after the meeting. And subsequent to that, there was the article in the Daily News. And so he did bring it up at the end of the meeting, just informing the committee that, you know, that they were talking about it and that it could potentially be on the agenda next month. I think that's positive.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure it's something they don't want to think about, but I think it's something that should be considered. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the article did a really good job, you know, laying out why it's important.
Yeah.
The whole reason the school's there is to educate our future. So.
Right, right. Which is imperative. Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw a couple of days after that, there was an opinion piece in the Daily News by the staff.
I did see that, yeah. Great, thanks for that. So discussion policy regarding electric vehicle charging stations. So Wayne Amwell sent an email because he'd been contacted more than once about non-availability of any of the charging stations out here. And, you know, was it time to consider, to talk about signage? Well, I don't know, Wendy, you weren't on the board at that point, Archie, you were, but, you know, that was something that actually was discussed early on is how should we handle this, you know, signage and should the spaces be exclusive EV charging station spaces, or should, you know, just how do we manage that? So, and the agreement was that, or at least my recollection of the agreement was that at the outset, we would not make them exclusive EV charging stations. Instead, we would see how things evolve. And when they evolve to the point where it was a problem, we would then put up signage to, you know, for some number of spaces. And presumably that's going to change with time. You know, demand will change with time, and the number of spaces that have to be or that need to be marked as EV charging only will change as demand increases. Obviously it's on the agenda. I made a unilateral action and went out and turned a bollard or two bollards. So the bollards have these yellow foam tubes on them. And on one side, well, they're painted yellow. And on one side, it says EV charging only. And the other side, it says nothing, which is the way they were all set up per the original agreement. So I went out the other day and I rotated two bollards. And it was actually a week ago tonight, I think, because I think it was a vaccination night and there were a lot of cars in the parking lot, but all those spaces were open. All four of them were open.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, so was I a little bit, but I got there and I turned two of them. I turned the southernmost two and took a couple of pictures and went back to my car and was getting in my car and I saw a vehicle come by and it pulled in. The guy driving it saw the EV charging only and immediately backed down and went up and found another spot. It was like, oh boy, that's amazing. It actually worked. And then I came in here tonight and there's another vaccination clinic and all four spaces were filled with non-EV vehicles. So I don't know what that means. Notably, as I came in, I also noticed that one of the two handicap parking spaces was filled with a non-handicap vehicle. So
Yeah, I think this is an outlier of it.
yeah, I think this is heavy parking pressure here right now. Plus the entry area, you know, the place in front of the doorway where there's no parking, that was also filled with a vehicle. So
Yeah, I think people who aren't familiar with the
I
parking
think,
lot.
right, yeah, but I think that, like in a situation like this with the vaccine clinic, you know, maybe we, in that situation, or if there was a town meeting or something like that, then in that situation, it should be that because we don't want to, someone's not gonna charge their vehicle when they go for 10 minutes to get a vaccine. So I think we're actually being a little inflexible by not letting people, just anybody park there on a situation like that. But how can we make it, how can we make the signage flexible?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's funny. Everything I said was kind of anecdotal. It wasn't like I wasn't saying it to be angry or to be, I mean, it's just, it's the ironies of the world. This is the way the world works. So it's not like I'm irritated that people were parking there tonight. It was actually kind of humorous in a way. I do think that having two of those parking spots now marked, and we might want to put some other signage up, something that's a little bit more definitive. But I do think maybe it's time that we do that. If there have been some people who've gotten there and found no place to park, and I don't know the circumstances. Wayne seemed to think that it might actually be people who work in the building who are parking there on normal work days. And if that's the case, then there should be a couple of spaces that are left open, it seems to me, so that if somebody comes with an EV, if in fact there's now usage, that they should be available. So Angus had sent a report. He gets a monthly report from ChargePoint.
That is.
Yeah, and the usage is increasing. And I'm sure it's going to increase in fits and starts, but there should be a gradual trend up. I have seen a few times when I've come in here vehicles that will plug in and charging.
I have too.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense that we now, personally, I think it makes sense that we now have a couple of spaces that are designated EV charging, and if somebody parks there and they're not charging EV, it's not like we're going to fine them. But try to ensure availability, do what we can to ensure availability.
So does this mean that there are 19 sessions, but only 5 new drivers? Is that like the same persons?
I think I think that's probably what that means. Yeah. And which month was that? Is that December?
November.
Or November? I mean, yeah.
But saved 43 gallons of gasoline.
Yeah, and so it's going to increase. More and more people are buying electric vehicles, and not everybody's going to ever want to charge here or need to charge here.
And how's the rate determined?
When we started up, I guessed at a reasonable rate based on local electrical costs, and they vary from different points of time, during different points of time in the year. So right now we're in the high period, and so we're charging 35 cents kilowatt hour. Right now the cost of energy here, I think, is just over, the cost of energy delivered using the standard offering from National Grid is just over 30 cents a kilowatt hour. That's very high.
That's high.
But it changes seasonally here. So in the summer, it's going to be substantially lower. I looked at bills from earlier in the year, and it was like down 21, 22, something like that, if I remember right, which is still relative to much of the country is high. But that's the cost of the energy plus delivery and all the other.
30 is way up.
Yeah, but that's what if you're using the standard offering right now from National, that you would get from National Grid, that's what you're paying now.
Okay.
We should. I know I got a rate sheet from National Grid in my last electric bill, and I have it, and I haven't gone to add up the pieces to see what the cost should be right now. But yeah, that's around where it is. Because they twice a year they put in the rate rate sheet when the rates change to tell you what the cost is. And I guess I know you had done a little bit of research early on and you thought that rate was high. Whatever it's worth, I was over in Amesbury and plugged in there about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I only plugged in for 15 minutes or so, but I was trying to get home without switching over to using gas. And it was 44 cents a kilowatt hour.
I did happen to talk to someone from Shore early this fall, probably 6 or 8, 10 weeks ago, and that came up in conversation, and she told me it's not high.
Yeah. I don't really think it is. You know, it's a little bit more than you would pay to charge at home, but there's a convenience factor. Yeah. So
You're looking for blessing after the fact?
That's right. Here, slap my hand. What do you think, Archie?
So I think half of it.
Yeah, that was exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of if there's a special event like this and you're not enforcing it, so
Right.
I don't think there's an issue.
Right.
Unless people see that and get used to it.
Yeah. Yeah, but most people who I think park here on a regular basis would, I expect, will respect that and won't do that.
So, Rick, are you looking to looking just at the 1910 building or also the Page?
Well, the Page usage, I looked at had a couple of bills from Page. You know, I asked Wayne and Marie sent, I think, 3 months of bills for each location, and Page usage is literally zero. They're not getting used, and you know, I guess I expected that at some point some teachers there would get electric vehicles, and maybe you know, maybe we need to promote it at Page School. You know, maybe we need to talk with the principal and let her know that, you know, that the stations are there for not just public use, but for teacher use too. And you know, obviously, first a teacher has to have a car that they would, or some other staff member has to have a vehicle that would plug in. But you know, I guess I imagine that over time, that staff at Page somebody would, you know, would break the ice and would get an electric vehicle.
Are these publicized on, you know, whatever app that is?
The one at Page actually was not. It's supposed to be. In fact, I've never looked at that, but in theory, the original idea was that it was going to be made so that it was visible during school hours, just so that people weren't coming onto camp, not the Page grounds, just to charge. But that when school wasn't in session, that they would be visible. Now I don't know how it's actually been implemented. And,
those were the specifications that we gave to ChargePoint.
yeah.
So,
Okay.
I mean, I haven't checked if that's what they're doing, but we were able to customize. You're able to have on and off hours for when it appears in their app.
Yeah.
And so we worked with the principal and gave them the hours that the school's not in session.
Yeah.
But the reason I asked that question, Rick, is there's a new principal there now, Emily Perry, but back with her predecessor, Dustin Gray, when these went in initially, he did raise some concerns about the location being right in front and the limited amount of parking they have there. And at the time, he did tell him that if there was a move toward restricting those 2 EV spaces, that we would include them in the conversation. So I think for 1910 building, you know, no issue, but I think for Page, I do think we should engage the principal. So that's why I wanted to ask if what you were proposing tonight was just for one or for both locations.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, I think at this point, it only makes sense here because there is no usage in Page, so obviously there's no conflict.
Well, that could be because there's all the, you know, diesel powered cars are using up the spaces.
Could be. I should drive up there during the day and just take a look. I'll do that.
It's not listed.
You looking on the third point then?
Page, it's not listed. but the town is.
Okay.
So can that be fine?
Yeah, sure we
But,
can.
but we don't want.
Yeah, okay.
Off school hours, so we do.
But he just, it might just be through Google. It
Oh.
it might, like, if you
Oh,
have the
Google,
ChargePoint
yeah.
Yeah,
app,
I mean, I've got the ChargePoint app, I'll look on the ChargePoint app and see if they appear right now, because it's at night. But actually, in a way, I don't know if we really do.
You know, I mean, we want people driving up there at night. I'm not sure. we
Yeah,
will.
yeah, I mean, the hope is that long-term is that staff find it to be useful. And, and they'll be there for. Okay, so there's, but yeah, it's not, the one of the page don't show up. So, okay, well, yeah, that answers that. But, but really, I mean, the expectation was it was gonna be mostly for staff. And maybe, so Emily Pateri, I think is the name of the principal, and, if she knows, she could make sure staff know. Okay, so, we have, next item is to review the charge of the personnel committee.
That's pretty outdated. So Angus, how do you see the personnel committee fitting in with your responsibilities for human resources? It's kind of obvious, you don't need it anymore in some respects, right?
Well, it clearly was written, in a different time, in '99, and it was, the committee was set up as being advisory to the select board and its responsibilities in personnel administration. So now that the, change in form of government and those responsibilities, rest with my office, and there is and needs to be a close relationship between my office and the select board, where so many of the personnel decisions on anything like, hiring or firing or wages is all, subject to board approval. There has to be a close, relationship there. We have to be in sync in order for things to work well. And, I think with the way this charge is written to be advisory to the board is kind of, it's not that relevant. The way it's, I'm not saying a committee can't be relevant, but the charge as written isn't really relevant to the form of government we have. Partly because, as you know, when decisions need to be made, it's often, there's not the time for multiple meetings and weeks and months of delay. If you need to post a job and you need to make sure you got the wage in the right range, you need to post the job. And I need to bring it to the board, get some feedback, post the job, and not lose, 4, 6, or 8 weeks. So I definitely think it needs to be revisited. I haven't had a whole lot of, the personnel committee in the last job that I worked in up in Maine had a very narrow responsibility, which was the grievance hearing board. So it would only meet if there was a grievance that, went up the chain to the point where it was then, kind of the top of the chain. The end of the line for a grievance was the personnel committee. So it had a very narrow function, but an important one. It didn't happen to come up in the 3 years I was there. There was not, nothing that got that point, but it had a defined function. In talking with Mary Accardi, who, we'll get to that in another topic or two on the wage and classification study, I have, I've been totally open book with her in terms of some of the moving parts and some of the dynamics, because I want to make sure they're taking that into account in estimating the level of effort, because there is some complexity, and we need to make sure the wage and classification study accounts for that. And so I did mention that this, well, here's what happened. She asked me, as we were working through scope and budget, she said, is there a personnel committee that, I need to be factoring in those meetings and those feedback groups? Well, I said no and yes. She said, oh, yes and no. I said, well, no and yes, because yes, there is one, but they hadn't met for 4 years before I started, and haven't met at this point for almost 2 years. So, I said it's an area of active focus of what is the role of the committee in this new form of government, and what's the way that can be functional in terms of having enough staff support for them to actually be able to be constructively involved. And so she said that she'd be happy to. She said that personnel committee's role has changed a lot over the years in the municipal world, and she said she'd be happy to kind of help speak to that in the process of this wage and classification study, is to help advise on what should be, the role. But I don't want to get ahead of my skis on this. It's not something other than the direct experience I had in Hamden, which I just described. It's not something I've done any research on. I'd much rather have a conversation, between you guys and say the, Mary Carty, who's works in the HR field, because I don't, it's just not something I've looked into much. But I do know that, some of the questions that I've had on personnel policy, for instance, the issue of changing job descriptions, and what I felt for over 3 years, I've been putting in writing, this is really important, this is really important. I wrote memos to the personnel committee saying this is really important, and literally nothing has happened. And so we're now starting to deal with that. And I kind of feel like with the team that we have, and myself and Stephanie, and working with Tim and working with you guys, we're now making changes to the personnel policy, and we're carrying things forward. And I think that, to me, is a more constructive way to invest time, because at the end of the day, all of the policies, any of the actions my office takes, with limited exception, are subject to policies that this board approves. So there's a steep learning curve on this, and where we are a small organization, I think some of the needs and challenges that we face, you guys are uniquely positioned to understand that, because you see what goes on, week in and week out, in terms of the roles of the different departments. I think it's asking a lot for a committee that doesn't have that kind of front row seat to come in, without any grounding necessarily, and to have, to be able to come in and say, oh, well, this is the answer, unless you have a committee comprised of HR experts who are particular expertise in the municipal realm. I think that's a tall order, and it would demand, a lot of staff time to get that, to have a personnel committee that was kind of like fully engaged and fully up to speed. It's like, we better have a staff person just to keep them apprised of what goes on, because there's so much that goes on over the course of a single, week or two, never mind over the years. It's just such a dynamic environment. But it is a bylaw, so if there's going to be any change to it, it's going to need to go to town meeting. And I do think, similar to maybe what you did with the Affordable Housing Trust, maybe part of the current personnel committee's role could be to look at the bylaw, look at what other towns do, have access to people like, Tim Zessen and, the Collins Center staff, and to have some sounding boards, and to, help to gather ideas on what is the role in a kind of a modern municipal form of government. for a personnel committee. You know, if your board wasn't so embedded in personnel decisions, I might see things differently. But the way things are set up with the way our legislation is written, you know, as you can see, it's a full-time job keeping you guys up to speed. If there's not some other group, it's like just taking time away from keeping you guys, you know, doing what you need done.
Well, I guess this isn't quite what I had, where I thought we would be going with this. I thought, you know, we had talked about the potential for a major rewrite of personnel policy. And I envisioned that that was what the, you know, the new committee, you know, the personnel committee would take a look at. And, you know, one of the ideas was that we would, and I don't recall, maybe we didn't talk about this at a full select board meeting. Maybe it was just conversation that out of Angus and with it, you know, I don't recall who else, but it was the idea of essentially taking an existing personnel policy of another municipality and poaching it, you know, and you know, then modifying it as we saw necessary. Yeah. Am I off base? Is that not? That's, I guess that's where I thought.
Well, no, you're not, because things are so disparate. Like you made one change, and then the whole thing is not really put together as one. So instead of like trying to fix something that's really completely broken, we just like scrap it and start from scratch.
Yeah.
I guess there's two separate issues. I mean, this bylaw is outdated and no longer represents what we have. So that's one issue. Then the other issue is, you know, what we talked about, the personnel committee working on.
So
on the personnel policy updates, you know, that is part of what we've got KP working on. We've done it much more piecemeal in the last several months. I don't mean that in a bad way. I actually think that's been a really good thing, because I think up until probably this past summer, you know, I think we've maybe been, including myself, maybe trying to have the perfect be the enemy of the good, and trying to wait till we had time to kind of tackle the whole thing. And then after 3 years, it's kind of clear, well, that time's never going to come. And so I think this board, as currently composed, has been much more proactive about saying, hey, if we know this is an issue, let's carve off this issue and let's tackle it. And for that reason, there have been, I think, 5 or 6 amendments to the personnel policy in the last year.
Yeah, no, we've definitely done it. We made a handful of changes, and that I'm not saying that was not a good thing to have done, but I guess and I didn't realize, I should probably recall this. We've got a lot of balls up in the air, but I didn't recall that KP was doing major revision to.
That's what we've been talking with them about since last spring. And when we had that meeting, you know, back in October that we invited the other chairs to, it was partly to say we are going to be continuing to work on the personnel policies, and KP. You know, the issue, as you see, you know, you see the legal costs. It's a bandwidth issue. It's a budget issue. And the bandwidth issue is, you know, largely in my office, because it's myself and Stephanie who are kind of deeply involved with this stuff. And we're deeply involved with, you know, we're both work a ton of hours, like a ton of hours, and to the point where, you know, there's bandwidth issues. So it just, you know, just because we say we want to do it doesn't mean it just gets done. And this is where I think building consensus around changes to personnel policy involving the select board, involving personnel, actual staff, involving other boards and commissions who have, some personnel assigned to them, is a huge effort. And so to me, you try to run that through a new committee. In my view, it's diverting that huge effort even more diffusely and making it that much harder to get done what's already very hard to get done. Because I just don't see how a committee functions without either me or Stephanie going to every meeting. And, I put in many, many hours my first year and a half, 2 years, priming the pump for this committee to meet and putting in dozens of hours, to support meetings and meeting packets and write memos. And here's all the backup. And, all of that time, just took away from other things that needed to get done in that time. So I don't know. It's not like we have a dedicated staff person who can support this committee. There's just a couple of us, and it's again, if you had a committee of people who are HR people in other towns and actually have expertise in the municipal HR realm, that'd be one thing. But I don't think that's what we're talking about. We had talked about that once we have some, a package of draft amendments to the personnel policy, that the personnel committee could be a good venue to sound those out and to have, a meeting or a couple of meetings once there's some revisions to respond to, that could be a venue where, basically some working meetings are held. But I don't think it was, I don't think it was contemplated that it would be run the whole thing through that committee.
Okay. Okay, so, not really.
Well, it's just a shame that Mark Van expressed interest, and I was
Exactly.
confused to have him be involved.
Right.
Now it seems like there's no role for him. But maybe, Angus, you said the consultant on the wage study could provide some recommendations to us. Maybe we just wait for that and go from there.
Well, and that, she said that on a call earlier today. Maybe Rick, maybe you talk to her directly and get some thoughts and try to get things moving more quickly of just some examples. Because I would love to have, any involvement. Lark is nothing but helpful and nothing but a tremendous resource and knowledge. But I think that, what we're trying to get done right now on personnel as we speak, between, trying to advance some personnel policy changes and a wholesale comprehensive wage and classification study, that's a lot to take on. And so I think to get those things done, it's going to take everything we've got. And the experience I've had so far is that the committee, it's drawn resources. It hasn't brought bandwidth. It's drawn bandwidth, and that's absolutely just a fact. That's just a fact.
Okay. Yeah, we don't want to cause that anymore.
I think with the right leadership and the right kind of posture, a committee could be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, I don't think we're going to make progress on this in this conversation right now. I'd like maybe Angus just to sit down and talk with you about it, about where to go with this, and maybe we can get Mark in the conversation and figure out what we're gonna do. I mean, we created this new committee, or not created this new committee, but added somebody new to it and, thought that we had a group that would be able to make progress, but now I'm not sure what progress we're trying to get to.
Yeah, I need a scope.
Right.
If you draw from the existing charge, the committee will conduct research and carry out instructions that you direct. So if there are, things you, as the appointing authority, want them to do, that is what the bylaw provides for. But as I look at the steps of the initiatives that we already have underway, it's I don't know, going to more committee meetings isn't going to help make progress. It's just,
yeah. Well, no, I think what's going on with the Collins Center is great. And I mean, it sounds like we will get, good product, and good, good progress out of it. Okay, I don't think we have a whole lot more to do with that. So we have the amendments to the FY22 wage schedule. Did you have anything more you want to say about that, Angus?
No, I think,
Okay.
no.
Okay. Yeah, so this was a slight adjustment in hourly rate for 2 positions. And so we already voted this.
An executive.
Yeah, we need to vote it in executive session.
Yeah, it's just to have it in. There's got to be something in the open session.
Yeah, okay.
So can we just vote on it as referenced, or do we need to say the position and the wage?
I think if you just reference what's, page 186 of the packet.
So we'll, so I move that we approve the change in employee compensation schedule for 2 positions as shown on, page 188, is that 88 or 80?
186.
186, okay, of the January 20th or December 20th.
Second.
I'm losing, I'm getting too tired. December 20th, 2021 open session packet. Okay. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor? Aye.
So now into updates. So the wage study, we made a lot of progress. I think we have a really good scope. That the price tag does, has gone up a little bit, but I expected that, and I continue to emphasize to the vendor, and they totally understand this, that it's a dynamic environment. The new legislation and the fact of some bylaws and policies not having been adjusted to kind of for consistency. Some of what we anticipate with the discussions, not just with department heads and staff, but with other boards and commissions. I just wanted to make sure, I do want to make sure that they are coming into it with eyes wide open and have the time to spend, so that we really get something that we all feel really confident with, and that it's been kind of fully vetted and fully informed by a lot of input from a lot of different parties. So I feel really good about the vendor, their qualifications. The project manager gives me a lot of confidence. And, just, they're steeped in this work. This is what they do. So I think it's going to be really helpful. I know I did send out a updated draft with just some minor revisions to task 4, just a couple of hours before the meeting. But the one that is there in the packet is pretty close to what, where we are now. So, if there's questions or comments the board has, this is still draft. We haven't finalized it, but we really not only want to get this right, we need to get this right. This is, this next, I think this study is very, very important to this town.
And it sounds like the timeframe, Mary was pretty confident that there'll be info available that's useful for this budget, this particular budget.
That's right. And, obviously when the initial budget's proposed January 31st, it won't be done, obviously, but with the town meeting, there's a couple of different scenarios where wage adjustments, if and as found warranted, could be built in ideally prior to the vote of the town meeting vote. It is possible, that the approach that we discussed a couple of weeks ago of having a lump sum that's included that's for the express purpose of supporting wage adjustments, but ideally that all gets done. And yeah, she did think that that was very doable to get that done in a way that could then, so let's say, we go through the FinCom process, but we tell them that toward the end of the process, there's going to be a slate of proposed changes. And they know that going in, they're not surprised by that. Obviously I can't speak for them or other groups and how quickly people will move, how they are to that, because it is kind of outside of the norm, but it's definitely possible. And she said that she's seen that in other communities where on a similar timeline where the study's been roughly concurrent with the budget, and there have been changes made kind of later in the budget process than would normally happen in order to make sure the approved budget reflects, next year's wages.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how to see the final product.
Angus, one thing I just wanted to let you know is that apparently a similar study was done in Topsfield and Rowley just recently, so that might be a good resource for.
Okay.
One of the library staff was telling me they just got a significant increase in their paycheck and they didn't know why. It was as a result of one of these wage surveys, and that was just recently.
Topsfield. All right.
We'll let that get out.
And one thing we did build in that wasn't in the initial draft, but I is in the task 3. There's the section that we added about the whole exempt versus non-exempt in consultation with council. So that's something I've been corresponding with KP about for quite a while. But we just never kind of initiated it. But I think that's going to be something to have that kind of solidified in one place is going to be really good.
Yeah, so
Is that, are we gonna feel, who's like some of these opinions are tough to call, so whose opinion are we gonna take? When I read that too.
Mm-hmm. For most positions on both sides, it's very clear. Obviously the police chief is salaried, and so on. There's some that are very, very clear.
Right.
There tend to be.
I just like, if we got the consultant gave us the report, that's not necessarily handed down, should we just accept that without question? I guess that's my.
Right. No, that's why, yeah, there'd be, I mean, it's really, I have a list of what I think, which is based on, you know, what different job descriptions say. Some job descriptions don't specify. So for those, you know, I have, and it's marked on the salary table that you guys vote every June or July. You know, every position says either salaried or hourly or stipend. So that is part of kind of official documents, town documents going back many years. It's just that it's never, you know, where we have had a couple of positions that have been in a gray area at times, because the same position doesn't necessarily stay the same status over time. It can change depending on how the job changes, how different personnel do the job, the level of independence or lack of independence that they have, in fact. So that's where the you know, discussions with the employees regarding the job descriptions, the actual responsibilities, all of that is a very subjective thing, or not. It's qualitative, is what I meant to say. You know, I think it's likely to either validate what we think we know, or if there's anything that we might have wrong, let us know that, and what do you do about that?
Right.
You know, it's one, you know, it's there are some challenging ones. I mean, you know, the Council on Aging director is a great example where, you know, probably doesn't meet the standard to be salaried, but I do know from, you know, with Teresa that the expectation of her was that she was answering the phone 7 days a week, responding to emails 7 days a week, and she did all of that and was happy to do it and saw it as part of her role. And so I told her 3 years ago, I said, I think of you as exempt, and she said she was good with that. We were all good with that, because the nature of the job requires, and there's expectations of that office that it's kind of available, you know, whether it's Saturday, Sunday, you know, people feel they ought to be able to call that office. And so that's part of how it's gone. But in fact, if you really read the labor law, does that, you know, so then it's like, okay, well, what if it's an hourly position? Do you tell that person to leave their cell phone at home all weekends? Because the minute they start doing work on the weekends, they got to put it in the timesheet. You got to start paying overtime. It gets very tricky. So I think it's going to be good to be able to flesh out these issues, not on a, you know, case by case, but comprehensively.
But also with somebody who isn't, we have historical bias and stuff because we're here, and these are like completely new set of eyes.
The tough call will be interesting to hear. I don't know, you know, if they'll provide the rationale, but it'd be interesting to hear the rationale, you know, based on, you know, conversations we've had and conversations with KP Law in particular, you know, and how do you arrive at determining whether, you know, when you're in that gray area, how do you make that final call? And it'll be interesting to see what the reasoning is or the rationale is for going one way or the other on it. Yeah.
Great. All right, so yeah, moving along. You know, as you know, we continue to work with the you know, on the summer rec program, and how is that going to be staffed and structured for summer of 2022? The goal is to resume having a summer rec program next summer after 2 years that there has not been one due to COVID. But getting the staffing levels right and the budgeting, that's been a major focus these last couple of months. And so, you know, that is, I am working with the chair of Park and Rec to try to get an extra meeting added before their regular January 20th meeting. I had thought they were meeting this past Thursday. That was scheduled, but that didn't end up happening. So anything on wages would come back to the board, so you can expect to see that at your presumably at your January 18th meeting. You have on the pipe stave page, Main Street. Let's see, the basic project timeline. You're going to start to see shortly after the first of the year. We're going to do some outreach through social media and the town website to solicit public input on that and start to prime the pump on getting people sharing their comments. We've got a bunch of comments going back over the last couple of years, and Wayne and I have kind of batched those all up. But we want to get people aware that safety audit is going on, and we are going to postpone doing the traffic counts until the spring because that's going to be much more representative of actual conditions, peak conditions. But yeah, we had a good Zoom meeting with the vendor. I think it was this past Thursday, and the goal is to be in a good position to apply for Safe Routes to Schools grant next fall. So we continue to feel good about that. The Mill Pond All Persons Trail, there's a recently signed contract with the vendor. We just signed that late last week, and it actually, I think unless Stephanie had time to do it today, it's probably not fully executed yet. It still needs her signature to certify the availability of funds, but basically we have an agreed scope and timeline. And you can see that does call for, I'm looking at page 197 of the packet. It is a pretty quick timeline. And there's a lot else going on during that time of year. The initial draft had actually had the whole thing playing out in about a month. And I kind of said, whoa. Like, there's a lot of other, all the committees have bandwidth issues in January, February, especially, Select Board and FinCom and so forth. So, but I think this is a good work scope. Brad has really been the primary liaison with the vendor up to this point. Unless there's questions on that next issue, I do have a meeting later this week with my counterparts in Merrimack and Groveland, and although that was recently downgraded to a Zoom rather than an in-person meeting, but we will be convening later this week and talking about opportunities for enhanced collaboration looking ahead. There's a couple of areas that there might be opportunity, and it's best way to understand that is just talking with the kind of chief administrative officials and seeing what their read of the tea leaves is, as well as talking about existing collaboration like the conservation agent. Moody's report, we got that about a week and a half ago, and typical for some of these finance things, they send it to us and we're given about 5 days to review and comment, but we did do that, myself, Stephanie, Caitlin, and Christian, and there were a couple of numbers that don't exactly align with some of the numbers that we use on valuation, but they use a kind of a state template, or not a state database where everything's kind of standardized. All the values are kind of, so it doesn't align. If you look at, for instance, what it's showing is the total value. That does not align exactly with what the actual certified assessed values are. So we had a little, dialogue just to understand the basis of some of that, but it's just a snapshot. They issue these every year, and this is not the kind of, big review that they would do, for instance, upon a new bond issue. This isn't the thing where you really can petition for like an improved credit rating. that's something that we would do more at the time that we're initiating Mbta. But I thought I'd include it as just a snapshot of the town's finances.
Is Moody's charged for that report? Or is
No.
No? Anybody have, anything to talk about or, for future agenda items? Well, that's what you said, I'm tired. Yes, everybody else is, is adjourned. In favor? Aye.